Hi, it's Ileana here at Awakening Cosmic Reality Show, and today I have Johan Fritz with me. He is a secret space program asset, and today we are going to be discussing the structure of planetary corporations, or what is called interplanetary corporate conglomerate, because some experiencers call it that, and some of us call it planetary corporations, and also lunar space operations or lunar operations command. Again, it has slightly various names depending on the SSP asset and their experiences. So welcome, Johan.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for giving me a chance to talk with you, and thank you for tuning in as well.
I've seen some of your conferences that you've gone to in Nevada recently, and you were talking about planetary corporations, or ICC, and also Lunar Operations Command, or Lunar Space Operations. So you have a lot of experiences with that. So can you please describe the structures of those two organizations and what it has to do with Space Force?
Well, the way it originally came to be, right, is that the Germans essentially decided that every place that they would set down colonies, they would actually create a corporation to manage, run, and keep that particular colony up and operational. They gave them a budget, they gave them X number of people, and they said you're required to keep your cost center, your BU, your business unit up operational in black, right? And what we notice is that some of these organizations did really, really well. I mean, look at Ares Prima, right? What some people call New Berlin. That particular colony did very well. They had a huge influx of slave trade initially, which helped them build the colony out. And they also had a huge influx of cash. And look at the LOC, right? So let's break this down for a minute, right? So the Earth itself has its own corporation, right? And then you have Lunar Corp, which manages all of our assets and stuff on the moon. Mars has its own corporation. They call it MCC, the Mars Corporation conglomerate. Then you've got the Belt Corp, which is the group of bodies in between Mars and Jupiter. And then, of course, Jupiter, Saturn, and all the other planets have their own corporations as well. And each group is required by their contract to essentially, again, maintain themselves in the black, provide stuff back to the ICC when needed. They do a lot of exchanges. So what they're doing is they're essentially looking at their ledger and saying, I'm getting in X amount of item A, and I'm trading it for X amount of item B. And they make that exchange. So for example, if a colony needs more oxygen production, or they need more slaves, or they need more technology, we'll figure out some way to come up with a value on those things and exchange them between the corporations. So yeah, it's basically how it works.
Yeah, so how do these corporations like Planetary Corp or LOC, how do they acquire SSP assets?
So that actually starts with a couple of things. One, they look at people who, especially here on Earth, right? They look at those individuals who came in as star seeds, and they say, okay, well, if a star seed's brought into the programs, typically speaking, those individuals don't incur sort of karma. That's the first thing. Secondly, more importantly, these individuals have already had time where they've been operating high technology. They've been at a higher density, and they want these individuals to be in the programs, again, doing that exact same job. So they know it's easier to train them because it feels natural to them, it's intuitive to them, right? So that's the first thing that usually happens. They screen these individuals. There's a lot of stories I've heard from people, and I have my own as well, where people are in the grade schools, in your preschools, high schools, even the military, where they get screened. And as they're being screened, these individuals are basically being asked a certain type of question, but what they don't realize is in the background, this technology is actually screening their soul level contracts, where they come from, a whole bunch of stuff going on there. So, and these individuals usually are earmarked. They usually put an earmark next to these individuals saying, at some point, this individual may be a good asset to bring into the programs. He has to give either tacit consent or consent in order to join. And this is what a lot of folks don't understand is that, and let me be very clear about something too. There is another group that comes into this too, which is the slave trade, which they don't give consent. You got people like Tony Rodriguez, for example, right? He never gave consent to be taken off planet. They just took him off planet and there he went, right? So that's the third group in this mix as well.
Yeah, and planetary corporations, they're sort of not slave trade. They're more like, we need workers. You're good for this. You're good for that. So, and they entice you with technology and promises. You'll see stuff that's not available to you on Earth, like their med beds, holographic medical pods, Meditech units, holographic technology, biological drug serums will make you healthier, but you need to come to work with us. So they give you incentives to join up, basically.
Right.
You don't know what you're signing up for, but you think it's so great. You're better off in space than on Earth, so you go. And you end up in the 20 and back, 40 and back, 50, 60, some multiple backs over and over through the time travel, quantum leap time travel, because they have that tech, the Planetary Corps, ICC, LOC. So when you were in the space program, which of these groups or corporations did you work for, and what did you do with them?
Peter has told me that I was part of MCC. Now, I dealt with a lot of the Planetary Corps as the captain of my ship. So what that basically means is that when you're in a certain area of space, and let's say you're in orbit, that particular corporation may request to know who's up there. Like they see the transponder, they want to know who's up there. And of course, we have to tell them, look, this is who I am, this is why we're here, so on and so forth. I would also say too that a lot of times we also assisted, for example, the merchant marine fleet. They would have issues where they would get a message, like, let's say, for example, they would send a ship down to do like a supply rerun on a colony, and the colony didn't respond at all. They would call a ship like mine and they would say, look, we're not getting any response from this colony. Can you do something here? And then, of course, I would bring my guys in and we would land on the surface of that planet and go figure out what happened. So a lot of times we're directly interfacing with ICC personnel saying, look, your colony is not responding. How do you wish us to proceed? And in some cases they would say, okay, well, if you can recover anything, let us know. If you can't, also let us know. And they would bring people straight in, like they would actually repopulate a whole colony within a matter of a day or so. They would shift people around. So now on the back end of this, right? So you got the front end, which is what we're kind of talking about here, right?
Mm-hmm.
The back end is what I would call the PLCs, which is the processing logistics centers that happen within the ICC groups, right? So you have a combat group like mine that would be out in the field, would be dealing with a threat. Our eggheads would go out in the field, get samples, whether it be a live critter, a part of a critter, or samples of a critter, or maybe a couple of critters. They would put all that stuff into cryostasis, and we'd send it back to a group that was called PLC, which is this processing logistics center. Their job was to essentially to figure out how to monetize or quantify that genetic material, and then figure out how it actually helps the programs out. And then what ends up happening is you see people like Emery Smith, for example, right? He worked at one of these exact locations where they would bring all this material in. They would process it, medically deal with it, figure out what it is. And then, of course, if they needed to have a genetic sample, they could actually replicate those genetics from that particular sample and actually create a live being or whatever they needed to do.
It's quite interesting that you mentioned the acronym PLC, because I call the cybernetics labs and Planetary Corp on Mars PLC. And we'd see various ETs come in, alive, dead. We take genetic samples. We create biological human cyborgs with human body tissues, body parts.
And that's another side of this, right? So you also have what I'm talking about is the ET star being side. Mm-hmm. You also have a human side of this where we're going, okay, well, let's say we have a job where we know for a fact we have a 0% chance of this asset coming back. They build up a cyborg to do that job. They don't want to waste a human body to go do that particular job. And that's exactly what you're talking about, is that portion of that mission profile. They would say, this is a high threat mission profile. Let's send a cyborg in to actually do that particular job, because we know if it goes in there, it may take the target out, but we also don't want to lose one of our people to that particular mission type.
Mm-hmm. So I guess the genetic profile gets implanted into the human biological cyborg because it's also partially human, augmented with cybernetics and psionics and other things. But the original person remains on the base doing logistics or working in the cybernetics lab, but part of your genetics is in that cyborg, or part of your soul is in the cyborg, manning that sidebar, while you're still on the base and you're still functioning.
Correct. So we would call that soul fragment, and that soul fragment essentially resides within the altar, resides within the canister, the sleeve of that cyborg body or brain. When that cyborg finally dies or passes away, it rehomes back to the original soul. And that's where people start having like memory recall. They start having connections. In some cases, they may biolocate, meaning they can step into that cyborg body for a second and back into their own. Because there is a connection there. There's an energetic connection between these two particular energetic bodies. Yes.
Yeah, I remember creating Smartsuits, working with the holographic medical pods, but just doing it as an end user, like not knowing the schematics of how to build it, just using that to create what we needed in those PLC plants, cybernetic labs, as I call them. What was your experience with the Smartsuits, and how does that stuff work?
So, okay, depends on the program you're in, because certain programs have certain layers of technology they use, right? So for example, let's look at Kruger, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Kruger actually uses, they call it the smart gel, which actually fits in between the undersuit and your skin. It actually electronically allows the smart suit and the mesh to actually interpolate what the body's going to do. And it feeds that electrical information back to the suit, right? So it knows when your muscle moves a certain way, that you're going to move that way, instead of it having to go back to your brain and back down to the suit again, right? That's the first thing. The second layer would be like the mesh that fits underneath the armor usually. I call that stuff smart mesh, because what it essentially does is the armor actually locks into that mesh. It actually tells the visor that you're wearing, or the helmet you're wearing, what sort of equipment you have, what technical outlay you have, what sort of weapons you have, what range and capacity you have, how much oxygen you have, right? Mm-hmm. So on Mars, we did have situations, on the moon, where we had to have oxygen assist when we were doing certain mission profiles. Now, you start getting into what I would call the more combat roles. For example, when I was in MDF, and I know of at least 5 armor types there. Everything from what I would call the very thin, it looks almost like a skin suit that's used for scout armor, all the way up to what we call juggernaut armor or a Terminator armor, which is this really super heavy. You may wear actual body armor like you would for a standard Kruger mission, but you're actually sitting inside like this cybernetic mecha, essentially, that's super armored. Got a lot of heavy weapons in it. And they use those for what they call drop insert situations, where let's say you want to drop somebody from orbit, they're not allowing you to land. So what will happen is these, the juggernauts, they would fire them in these like encased shells. As they come into orbit, the shell, of course, would start to burn off. As the shell opens up, when you hit the ground, you start running at the target. And I actually do have some memories of doing that on a couple of missions. But again, it's all based on the mission profile that you're trying to do, right? You're trying to figure out, how do I take a mission and complete that mission within the parameters that I'm being given by my particular program, right? Mm-hmm. Nakwaffen, in my opinion, probably had the least flexible of the armor types, because they typically use 3, but I have seen more than that, depending on the mission profile. And those individuals that, like me, that actually defected over to Alliance eventually, we actually got full use of all 5 armor types at one point. So, yeah, so I mean, it just depends on the program, the mission profile, and what you're permitted to use.
And how is the LOC ICC alliance Nachtwaffen? What's the structural setup of those, and how are they connected to Space Force?
Okay, so that's kind of a big question. So I'm going to try to narrow down what I've been told, and then we'll kind of discuss a little bit here, right? So part of the stuff I heard here real recently was the fact that Space Force took over essentially what the ICC Superboard, the Triumvirate, had been doing. They came in and essentially they took over management. They were the new sheriff in town. Now, luckily, the guy who's in charge of Space Force is a white hat. He's not Cabal, from what I've been told by multiple sources. So that's good. The question is that how does this guy wrangle in all of these, I guess, side projects or side programs that have not ever had ICC oversight? And there are a bunch out there. And Nachtwaffen actually is one of the groups, along with the Red Star Rising, that eventually got absorbed back into ICC, and the Red Dragon and Japan's SSP group. All these groups did not have a whole lot of oversight by the ICC. So what Space Force has been trying to do is they've been essentially trying to figure out, how do we wrangle these people back into the program underneath us? So we have a unified command structure for all of these people, right? And some groups have flat out said we're not doing that. The 80% of Nachtwaffen that took the black goo flat out said we're not doing that. We're not going back under ICC Superboard or Space Force Command. And they sided with the Draco. You've got the Red Star Rising group, which did fall back under ICC because they ran out of money. Then you got the Chinese, the Red Dragon group. They specifically were actually started by the Triads in China because they had this huge money reserve, this pool to kind of play from. And they've been kind of in and out in terms of who they deal with. And same thing with Japan as well. So it depends upon the group again and what the level of interaction is. Now, what I would say is the LOC is kind of like the UN. So if these programs want to get in on the action, if they want to have a piece of the pie, they've got to come to the LOC and actually negotiate. And that's where all of our ambassadors and stuff usually sit, is in that particular organization. Usually, when you see groups like Nachtwaffen or some of these other groups that are out there coming in to negotiate, 9 times out of 10, it's usually not under pleasurable terms. Usually you've got people who are very nervous when these guys walk in. I seem to have memories of being in some of these negotiations where you'd walk into a room and we were not permitted to ever talk about what we did, who we did things to, where we were at, what missions we ever did. Our whole job was to essentially make a very menacing profile to the people in the room while our command officers would negotiate whatever the terms were. Now, you talked earlier about assets and how these assets get used, right? So usually what I would say is with most assets, there is this idea of what they call an asset arc, right? And what that means is that, let's say, like for my example, right? They brought me to Kruger. They found out I was very adept at using technology. I was very good at using the weapons. I'm very good at working within their style of mission profiles. I was later promoted into MDF, which again is another step in that arc, right? And that continued up through Nachtwaffen and the Alliance. And we see this a lot with assets where people are very good at utilizing those abilities they have. And they have the ability to actually go through that whole arc transition, which is where you were talking earlier about this idea of having people with multiple 20 in backs, right? And that's exactly what we're talking about here, is these individuals who, in some cases, they may be clones, they may be copied. They copy the essence and put it into the clone. But either way, these individuals are used throughout that development arc of that particular program.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you had been on the LOC and you had seen various ambassadors and government state people coming in. Can you describe that experience, what that was like for you?
So specifically when I was with Kruger, we used to do what we call dog and pony shows, right? And what they would do is they would have my particular unit, because we were considered what's called an HKT, a hunter killer team, or what's called special Kruger teams, SKTs. They would bring out groups like mine. We had the big, heavy, thick armor with the nice, the nice helmets and all the HUD displays and everything. and they would bring us out and they would have us stand behind this purple cordon. And the area that we're in, by the way, is what you call like the sixth layer inside the LOC. It looks kind of like this weird kind of like mall area. It's the easiest way to describe it. Like if you look at the walls and the floor, it looks like a really weird looking mall, but it's all corporate offices. Like all these different groups have their offices there. And we were standing there behind this purple cordon, and they would bring all these people in who thought they were still on Earth. And they would bring them in, and they would actually have them interfacing with our command staff, our officers, the people running Kruger, like Gabriel Kruger and his daughter, Alexandria. They'd be talking to all these people, trying to get feedback on where their money's going. They wanted to know where that money was being spent. And in my experience, and the funny part is, like, I had a guy who I do the Quantum Red Pill Cafe videos with, Ted Alexander. He and I were chatting before we even got into the video stuff. And I was telling him about this experience. As soon as I said, well, I remember seeing the Clintons up there. And he's like, I said, Bill Clinton was right here to my right. Hillary Clinton's right in front of me. And I said, and she, and she, he's like, yeah, she reached out and grabbed you by the junk. And then she looked at my officer, Commander Naguma, and she's like, are these guys fully operational? Is what she said. And he actually finished that statement. I didn't. Like he blurted it out. Like, so he's like, yeah, I was standing right next to you when that happened. So there's always really weird like synchronicities when you see it happen. You're kind of like, how the hell do you know that? And he's like, because I was standing right there looking right at Bill Clinton when it happened. Because Bill had that weird smirk on his face when he was watching your expression. I'm like, yeah. But see, this is exactly what we're talking about. These people don't care. They don't care about the end result. All they care about is the money being spent for what it was appropriated for. Right?
Yeah.
And in this particular case, you've got a bunch of mercenaries, which is what Kruger really was. And these mercenaries essentially are designed to work off planet typically and on planet, on Earth. But they're very, very good at taking out threats. So, and of course, if they're up there asking questions about where their money's going, they want to know, well, if I need a threat taken out, can they do it? Right?
Yeah, because what I remember, Planetary Corporations has a bunch of structural other aerospace engineering companies like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, GPL, like NASA GPL, yep. And other corporations that had been doing reverse engineering of the anti-gravity craft in the 1950s. Like Douglas McDonald and other corporations. So that's all part of the Planetary Corporation structure, Earth companies that provide either engineering advice on anti-gravity craft parts. They're all part of the compartmentalized companies.
Yeah, the first gen of that actually, I don't know if you saw Mr. McCandlish's drawings of the ARV.
Yes.
That is actually a first gen example of us trying to reverse engineer alien tech. Mm-hmm. The Army essentially sat down with what became the Air Force, their air wing group, and figured out how to reverse engineer that whole technology back. And the ARV system is essentially a reverse engineered group of tech.
Yeah, I mean, Douglas McDonald was involved in that, Philco, GPL, a lot of these early corporations, 1950s, NASA, all of that stuff, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Skunk Works, they've all been involved in this reverse engineering of these craft for one source or another, parts, schematics, designs. They've all participated in providing something, especially the aerospace companies, and there's other companies like Merck who do the drugs and stuff. So many. Like I have a huge list of about 50 companies that I have from memories of accessing these lists in the Mars databases on Planetary Corp on their basis, and just remembering downloading information into my cybernetic Neuralink implants that were in my brain, and just remembering this through self-hypnosis, this huge list of companies attached to Planetary Corp, because they're affiliates.
I understand this too, right? So you've got the way these programs typically work, they work in what they call a black box environment, right? So you have one company that provides part A, They know it has an input of type X, an output of type Y. They don't know where it goes. Only the program manager for that program knows how that box fits into the overall schema of what's going on. And that's where you've probably seen the drawing that I've used occasionally that has the whole SDI breakdown of all the different corporations there.
Yeah.
That is exactly what we're talking about, is this idea that these companies will take a black box, they'll trade it to this other company, and then get money back to develop more of the black boxes, right? The widgets, right? Mm-hmm. And then that widget gets used in whatever the program is they happen to be working on.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, there's the military industrial complex on that diagram. There's the 3-letter agencies. There's the aerospace corporations, private engineering companies. A lot of what was on your list is on my list as well. It's just not broken down in that particular structure. I just have the names of the companies in alphabetical order and what they do. And I did a video on that.
Well, that particular chart I had came from a debriefing that was done for Ronald Reagan back in 83, I think, 1982, 83, somewhere in that area. And that was essentially the structure of what they called SDI at the time, which became Solar Warden later on. And that is how they funneled all the technology, the money, the brain drain that people talk about. That's how it was being done.
Yeah.
Through those particular channels.
Yeah. So you know the structure through that chart. I never seen that chart before you actually presented it at the conference, because I saw the online stuff of the conference taping and I'm like, oh my gosh, a lot of those companies are on my list. I just did an alphabetical thing and described what these companies do and how they're connected. But you have the interconnections, how those Planetary Corp Earth affiliates are connected to the other groups, the SSP groups.
Yeah, and understand this too, right? So let's say that you're a Planetary Corporation manager, right? Or a director, depending on what title you want to use. The way that would typically work is your job is to make sure that the people that are in that colony or corporation have all the supplies, what they need to get the work done, right? So understand that every colony on that planet typically has what they call a workflow, right? So let's say that your colony is, let's say you're in the belt, right? And you're working on one of the asteroids outside Ceres. Your job is to go mine out solid water, oxygen out of a particular asteroid. And your group's job is to do nothing but that, right? Or let's say that you're in a group where you're recovering ancient tech that's inside that asteroid belt, right? Each of these groups will bring back their findings that they have over the course of a month. They will present those findings to that director or manager for that particular that Planetary Corp or corporation group. And then they'll figure out where are they in the big scheme of things. Hopefully, knock on wood or some facsimile, everything that's in that particular corporation comes out in the black. When they don't, that's when people start getting replaced, which is why usually the people you find in corporation structures tend to be pretty ruthless. They tend to be very like, I want my spreadsheet green kind of people, right? Yeah. As we would say in corporate America. Yeah. So, and for those of us that tend to be intuitive or very psychically sensitive, those individuals are hard to be around because they're so toxic typically. But yes.
And you had also mentioned that Space Force is it took over and supposed to like declassify something eventually to justify these programs. So can you discuss that a little bit?
So there's a bunch of us that have been getting feedback from people within Space Force and people who've been on the board that we knew, who essentially have told us either through recalls or through direct communications that there will be some level of disclosure happening starting somewhere in the 2021, 2022 window, maybe a little bit later, depending upon how things play out. Secondly, the thing we're looking for is how do we actually bring this technology to the masses? Because there is this idea that if we tell the human populace about the fact that there's colonies up there, there've been aliens up there, we don't know who they are, here's the technology, how they react to all that. And I think that's the real concern, because what they don't want to do is tell them, oh, by the way, we built all this crap. Because if they do, then the question comes up, well, how did you build all this crap and when? Which opens up a whole Pandora's box of information that they don't want to get into. Thirdly, I would say that one of the things you're going to have to look at is how do we make sure that we do this in chunks, right? So for example, you mentioned the medical side of things, right? We've actually already seen some of the medical disclosures already happening here on Earth. What I would actually point people to is go look up the Foxconn medbed that's actually being used right now in California to treat brain cancer. It does not require any user intervention at all. What it does is it automatically seeks out a certain signature within the brain that actually appears to be a cancerous tumor or a cancerous cell, and it fires a proton beam at that location and kills the cell without any need for the user to actually say or do anything.
Yeah, I've been getting emails about that Foxconn device, and people are saying it's the med bed, it can cure everything. I'm like, not everything. It just is a prototype for curing cancer. It's not
It's a medbed 0.01. It's a medbed 0.1.
Yeah, it's not a cure-all. It's just a initial testing thing that's just come out of patent. People have been sending me that picture with Donald Trump standing beside it and like looking at the person laying there.
Yep.
I'm like, that's not really a med bed. It's a device for cancer, curing cancer.
So understand this too, right? So if they have this medbed 0.1 out there, that gives them a way to draw a linear line to the medbed 1.0.
Yes.
They can come out and say, hey, by the way, we've already tested out, these 70 major groups of procedures and these 1,000 different things that we can do, which is what our medbed did on board ship.
Yeah.
We can bring that right to the populace right now and put them in hospitals. And at that point, that's where you're going to see a lot of this really high level medical technology get immediately dumped back into the populace. People are going to see that happen very, very quickly, I think.
Yeah, I suspect the first thing is the cancer, targeting cancer and tumors. That's going to be number one. What this MedBed 1.0 will do in genetic editing, like if you have genetic mutations for neurological diseases, like for example, I have a genetic mutation, hemiplegic migraine type 2, where is extreme paralysis. It's migraines. It's a mutation. It's a mutation in my genetics. That MedPod would be able to genetically edit that mutation, snip the gene that's responsible for this, and put a healthy set of genes into it and remove the faulty part of the mutation. So that's what this, I suspect, MedBed 2.0 would be able to do.
And more to your point, I mean, if you look at some of the big issues that we have within our species right now, look at the feminine half of the species with the HER2 and BRCA gene, right? With breast cancer. This is where you have the technology to literally go in and literally splice that gene out, put the good genes in, and within 24 hours, you start noticing a massive change in that body.
Yeah.
And they're already doing tests with this type of splicing with the CRISPR-9 virus at University of Maryland. They actually had a woman come in who had leukemia. She was in stage 4. She was on death's door. And this doctor came in from JPL and basically said, I have the ability to use CRISPR to genetically edit these genes. Am I allowed to try to help her? Yes or no? And they said, well, we have no other way to help her, so sure, go right ahead. And within 24 hours of him injecting the CRISPR-9 modified virus, she had 0 signs of leukemia in her body. And all of a sudden, everyone's like, what the hell happened? He's like, well, he goes, the virus did exactly its job. It went through and edited all these genes, and then it died out. It's exactly what it's designed to do.
Yeah. Or the biological drug serums, those monoclonal drugs that are out on the field right now for migraines, for headaches. Those are things that they've had on Mars forever. Just they're synthesized differently through the replicators. You don't have to take people's plasma to make it.
Well, we're also going to use that for COVID too now, right? So
Yeah, the convalescent plasma. That's actually what I'm on, and I've been on that for 3 years for, it's basically called Hashimoto's encephalopathy, and it might also be termed stiff person syndrome. I'm getting the blood work done for that right now. It's in the mitogen lab in Calgary. It was not easy to get that done. So there's certain types of plasma treatments and therapies and stem cells uh, that you could do stem cell therapy as well, where you can cure immunological autoimmune disorders and or put it into remission or lessen the symptoms. I'm on the subcutaneous immunoglobulin plasma treatment. Basically, it's a pool of people's human plasma that has been separated out from the blood and tested for diseases. It's clean, and it basically helps my autoimmune system to function correctly as best as it can. And I do this every week. I do infusions in my stomach of this every week. And it has been used to treat COVID-19. And they've taken people's plasma who've had COVID, and they called it convalescent plasma, and given it to people who've just, ended up in the hospital with it. And it helps to stop it quicker, stop the virus.
Right. Yes. So we're seeing all these type of technologies, right, that are based on the ability to manipulate and edit genetics, the ability to do very quick medical response, which is what, in my opinion, that's where the med bed shines, is that you don't need a human brain to actually get involved. You can just put the body in there, or the part of the human body in there, and it'll do all the work. It figures out what needs to happen to make that human body be where it's supposed to be. And like I said, I mean, the med beds I remember aboard ship could do up to 1,000+ procedures, 70 major groups of procedures. So depending upon what you had going on, the med bed, you may still have someone who's standing there next to the med bed who's monitoring you in case something goes awry, quote unquote, right? But the big picture is that the med bed pretty much did everything autonomously. It didn't need a human. It didn't need anybody there.
Yeah, I was just the monitor standing beside it, just making sure that it was doing the proper sequencing for whatever genetic editing, whatever disease it was curing, that it was doing it on time, that we were basically doing the proper genetic splicing and dicing, genetic editing, whatever was required. I just monitored the med bed. I never got to use it on myself to cure any of my own weird genetic issues that I have, but I've also heard that there's these genetic scanners. Well, not heard, I remember it from my memory regressions.
Different types.
Yeah.
Different types. There's a ring scanner and the square looking like light blue scanners.
Yeah, I remember genetic editing scanners where you could it scans the mutation in the body, and you put your hand on the scanner, your palm, and scans you, gets your whole genetic profile in less than half an hour. A couple of hours later, it pinpoints the mutation, and the genetic scanner can just edit out. You get scanned again, the certain mutation in your genome, in that specific gene itself, is sequenced out, edited out, and replaced with healthy genetics. So the mutation is gone, and you have a new sequence in the gene that's healthy.
Understand this too, right? This is also part of the process that the programs have been doing to remove out the genetics from these 22 genetic harvesting programs. They're trying to get people back to a genetically clean state, a genetic neutral state. And they're trying to figure out what these ET species have done to us and why. And then, what happened as an outcome of those particular editing sequences when they happened, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, what has occurred is that when they shut those 22 programs down, no one captured the data from most of it. So the ET groups involved pretty much went back to little siloed areas and kept that data to themselves. And we, as a species, are now stuck with the outcome of those 22 programs having been ran rampant through our species.
And the thing about experiments, if you know, they do these in the cybernetics labs, genetic experiments, splicing with human genetics and ETs, creating hybrids in the programs. The qualitative outcome of an experiment is if you have all the information, whether it's a failure or a success, you have to have the data storage of all the information of phase 1, 2, 3, 4 of those experiments. You have to have the data, otherwise it's useless. You can't replicate it if you don't have the files on it.
That's correct. Yep. And that's also too, when I was brought into the programs, I talked about the blue ring scanners they use. And those particular scanners do not only DNA, but they actually temporally map what's going on inside your head, like what your memories are, like what is the state of your neural mapping, your synaptic mapping at that exact moment in time. And why they do that, by the way, is so that when they go to regress you, they know exactly what kind of signature to look for in the regression process to blank slate you. So that's also part of this too, right? They're trying to figure out how do we get this person back to the point they won't ever remember being abducted.
Yeah. I remember Planetary Corp has a bigger version of that called a memory Ingram station, where it's kind of like either a seat that raises up or lowers down and has a scanner on top of it. It's partially holographic, and it scans your memories and it knows what to remove, what to add in, remove traumatic things so you can go back into the field. And that was in the cybernetics labs, or they could just totally erase you as a person, your memories.
We jokingly call those trip seats.
Yeah, the trip seats. I call them nicely the memory Ingram stations.
Yeah.
And they also have the ability to look at your ET lifetimes, your past lifetimes as ETs, and get that knowledge.
Well, that's Orion's cube technology.
Yeah. Yeah, so these things, memory Ingram stations, these ring-like scanners, they can even, I think they can go back into your past lives and look at your lifetimes as ETs or whatever you were.
Yep. The way the Orion's cube technology works, if you've ever seen a picture, you're not allowed to edit groups or planets of people. But what they do is you can look at an individual. When you crack it open, it actually breaks apart every lifetime that you'll ever be. From the time that you separate from source to the time you get back to source.
Amazing.
And that's what they look at. They look at all these different lifetimes to see what is the probability of this asset being a good used asset.
Mm-hmm. And quantum leap time travel, you could sequence timelines and just pick and choose how you want the asset to be in a timeline, because you could see it through this technology.
Yep. And many of us who have been used in multiple programs do have memories of those when they break that stuff apart so you can see it.
Yeah, and also in the conference, you mentioned your connection with Emery Smith, and can you discuss that a little bit, if it's okay?
I know that my group in Knockwaffen as a combat unit, I know that we were the upstream unit for his actual PLC group that did the processing. I know that to be the case because when he's talked about certain samples and stuff that he's worked with, I'm like, I know exactly where that came from. Like when he started mentioning like certain species, I'm like, I know exactly where that particular sample came from because I handled it. Well, my group did.
Did you transport it or?
Well, typically the way it would work is this, right? So let's say you're in a combat zone, you're done with a particular mission, you've gotten your samples, everything's been put in cryostasis, you go back aboard your ship, and typically what we're ordered to do is to notify the merchant marine fleet that we actually have stuff to be transferred to an ICC location where it can be processed. At that point, at some point, the merchant marine vessel docks with us, grabs the stuff, and leaves. Now, at that point, typically, we don't know where that stuff goes. But when Emery started talking about, well, this is what he dealt with, this is what he was working on, this is what he saw, I'm like, man, he had to have been the downstream people from our group or from many groups, because that stuff is the exact stuff that we were shipping back to the ICC. And typically what happens is, like I said, those individuals are looking at this from a genetic standpoint, a medical standpoint, and from an asset standpoint. How valuable is this particular genetic sample or this cryostasis individual or a pair of individuals? And all of that really revolves around this idea of trade. You have certain species who look at, other species they never ran across, but they want the genetics from that. They may find a breeding pair for a particular species extremely valuable. And they're willing to transfer any sort of technology we want, weapon or otherwise, to us for that particular genetic sample or that, that individual or the breeding pair. So depending upon what the valuation is of that genetic material, that determines what we get in return for that particular trade. And he, specifically Emory, was doing the upfront medical work to figure out what the evaluation part of that is. There's managers and program managers who are probably doing the evaluation process saying, okay, based on what Emory's told us, we know this is what this is, and we can evaluate it at this particular level, right? And by the way, people need to understand that like gold, silver, none of that matters out there, out in space. The only thing that matters is DNA.
Oh, I know. DNA matters quite a bit. Can I share something with you that
Sure.
I decided to participate in? The gentleman who sent me the DNA kits does not want his name mentioned because the experiment didn't work the way we thought it would, but it worked another way. So I got two DNA kits from, I was sent two DNA kits from ancestry.ca, and I channel different extraterrestrials, and I channeled Zagor, the reptilian insectoid hybrid, who I worked with on the cybernetics labs on Mars and in Nachtwaffen, sorry. So I channeled him, and he came in through me through deep trance. A friend of mine took the DNA sample when I was just me before the channeling and during the channeling when Zagor came in. And the idea was to see, does DNA change of the human when they channel the being? Does the human DNA change into the being? And when you look at the ancestry, is there a change? I'm predominantly European from Ukraine and other Polish and things. So when the idea was, does the DNA change or doesn't it? And Jay-Z Knight claimed, she channels Rumtha, she claimed that the DNA did change, but there was never a direct link provided to the test results. So I did the genetic testing. Both samples came back as me, El Cap. Nothing changed. So I think what happens is the energy comes in of the being you're channeling, but it doesn't directly change the genetics of you. You're still you, but the being you're channeling energetically is part of you while the channeling happens, and some residuals after.
Well, we've talked about this earlier, right? So when we have to break down like what's going on here, right? So we look at a biological body in the programs as what we call a sleeve, first off and foremost. And other ET species look at our biological bodies as sleeves. And what I mean by that is that they can insert a energetic individual inside that sleeve and operate the body.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, and more importantly, that we as spiritual beings are living in these physical bodies here on Earth to learn certain lessons and process certain things and do certain things. And I think what a lot of the star being groups usually say is that you guys get way too attached, and humanity gets way too attached to this idea of identity. And it's actually about energy signature, which is what you were talking about, is that when you bring someone else into your physical sleeve, your body, you're actually sharing energy and space with them inside that sleeve, and you're actually exchanging information with them, along with whatever it is you're passing on to the people around you, via your five senses, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, what I got out of that experiment, I'm like, I wasn't really upset that my DNA didn't change. I was like, either way, 50-50. If it changes, whatever. If it doesn't, whatever. What I got was, because I have a lot of knowledge about genetics from cybernetics labs. So I thought, wait a second. It was even boring just knowing my ancestry from Europe. It was what I expected, and my parents are my parents. Biologically, I am their daughter, very much so. 50% Jewish, European Jewish, and all the countries that I knew of from our ancestry, from it's the same. There's nothing there that was extraordinary. It was a basic profile of a European white girl from Europe, half Jewish. Very much so like my father. He's very much Jewish. So what I took out of this is the raw DNA, because Ancestry allows you to download your raw DNA and 23andMe as well. And I uploaded it to a genetic app called Genetic Genie, I believe it is. And I looked at my methylation genes, because psychically I knew that there was a mutation in the MAOA gene. It's the warrior gene, the aggression, the rage gene. Because sometimes I am very aggressive. For a girl, I am very aggressive and warrior-like. So I psychically already knew there was a mutation in that. And when I scanned it into the Genetic Genie, I'm like, that mutation came back as a double plus from my mother and my father, both alleles, male and female. So, but it's predominantly a male gene thing, comes from the male side for my father. He's very aggressive as well and can get upset and enraged easily. So we can both get enraged easily. So I'm like, oh, I can use a genetic app to put my raw DNA into and look at certain methylation genes and look at, I also have a vitamin D deficiency mutation, and I use a lot of vitamin D supplementation to stay awake and not be fatigued. So those are the two things I use raw DNA to look at mutations. One I already suspected because vitamin D deficiency I have. The other I psychically knew when I scanned myself that the mutation was there. And the results confirmed that. I would have had to pay $2,000 to do that methylation testing if I'd gone to a doctor. In Canada, it's S.S.P funding approved. You don't pay out of pocket for it. But that's not, I didn't get the DNA kits for that. I was looking for the trans DNA channeling, whether DNA changes, doing the experiment of the person who sent me the kits. But for me, the raw DNA was a gift, because I said to myself, wait a minute, you can do so much more with this genetic kit. Just because the experiment didn't work for the original thing, you can look at your raw DNA in a genetic app. Most people don't know that you can do that. The average person doesn't go looking through their methylation genes to figure out a specific mutation factor. I have a lot of the warrior characteristics. Very aggressive, very in your face, very like, you know. So I know that that's a genetic trait, part of the genetic trait. It doesn't comprise all of me, but part of it is genetics and its mutation from my father's side of the family. That's why I'm aggressive. That's why I am warrior-like. I'm not afraid to just get in your face and deal with it. Whatever we have to deal with, I just go straight on, take it straight on.
And the methylation part of that too, by the way, is something that in the programs they have to do when they age regress you. That is actually the flags they're looking for, because that methylation data actually tells them genetically how old are you. Meaning the telomeres that are actually at the very tail end of that genetic strand can genetically tell them how long has this particular body been here, yes or no. Mm-hmm. So what they have to do is they literally have to repair all those telomeres to get the genetic methylation data to look like it was when you were brought into the programs.
Yeah.
Or when that's how they actually age regress you.
The unfortunate thing is that they don't, whatever they fixed while you were in the program, that all gets undone after the age regression factor, because you're back to the way you were before you went into the SSP. Right. So I have all my genetic mutations. I have the worst genetics ever from my mother's side and father's side. And the only reason why I know about that is because I know genetics, and through medical doctors, through my own thing, that genetic kit thing that was sent to me, we were able to see the DNA why I am the way I am. normal people don't go requesting genetic testing for something they psychically know is within them, but I do because I look at it. I look at the genetic strands, look at the genome, look at all the little mutations, the big ones, the small ones, in those particular genes, because I know what makes what. The methylation genes are responsible for human behavior, for different supplement deficiencies. You know, they keep your body working correctly, synergetically. They keep your
it's also literally your body clock.
Yes, circadian rhythm and all of that stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, like actually genetic dating. Like you can look at that and go, you know, from the time of birth, how long can we expect this physical sleeve, this body, to be alive? And that methylation data can tell them based on probability, this is how long of a lifetime we would expect out of this particular body.
Yeah, I suspect about 60 years out of this one, maybe 70 if I'm lucky. It's not particularly good genetic wise, but I don't give up easily. So, you know, I'm here. I'm lucky to be alive at 35. But knowing the predisposition and the mutations that I have in my genes, I could do something about the methylation genes. I can work on not being so angry, not being enraged, you know, not acting out on that rage gene, on that warrior gene. Like, calm down, think about this logically. If somebody is yelling at me with a problem or coming at me with a problem, deal with it in a calm manner instead of blowing up like I would before, because I know the genetic issue, so I can choose not to engage in that behavior.
Yep.
And I can also take vitamin D3 supplement every day not to be deficient in it, because I know the mutation is there, but I can do something about it. Yep. So knowledge is half the power in what you know and what you can do with genetics.
Well, that's kind of what we're talking about with all this what I call soft and hard disclosure stuff that we do through these videos, is we're trying to dump as much of this knowledge out into the mass pool so that people can look at this and go, well, okay, we know there's another way to do this. How do we do it? Right? How do we approach this knowledge and use it for a way that is good for humanity? And a lot of the people that I've done videos with, if not all of them, tend to have that singular drive behind what they do. It's like we want to get this information out there so that people can look at this data and make some sense of it for themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you and I, we don't know how many people we're actually influencing when we talk about this stuff. I have people all the time that send me emails. I have a Proton mail account. It's Johan Fritz, S.S.P. at protonmail.com. JOHAN FRITZ SSP at protonmail.com. I get emails all the time from people where they're like, you know, you're exactly right with what you said about this particular thing. You know, it gives them confirmation they're not crazy, right? Now, on the other side of that is that once we have this knowledge, what do we do with it, right? That seems to be the Pandora's box for humanity. We've got groups here on Earth that absolutely want to wreak havoc on our species because they don't want us becoming fourth density. And then you got a very small, ever increasing size of a group that absolutely is becoming fourth density. A lot of your spiritually aware, spiritually awakened people, they're getting back in touch with the divine part of who they are, attached to the divine creator, and they're actualizing that part of who they are. And what is happening is that because of that belief in the fact that they have that connection, they're using that knowledge that they get from their experiences in the SSPs for good. They're actually bringing it to the masses and saying, look, this is what we need to do to create a positive outcome for us, right?
Yeah.
And you were talking about the stuff in Las Vegas, Nevada. We did our panels every night. That was one of the things, all the panels I sat on, I tried to hammer that home every single time, because I firmly believe that we as a species, we have the ability to co-create our outcome. The question is what do we choose to co-create, right?
Yeah.
And what I'm hoping is that, you know, me, and all of your followers, we can cognitively make a choice where we can say, you know what, we're going to co-create a very positive outcome for the human race.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm medically addicted to genetic testing, to other types of testing to figure out what's going on in my body. Can I give you an example what I just went through?
Sure.
So I fell off the bandwagon. I fell off the wagon and I ate a lot of gluten, a lot of bread, a lot of cakes. I love to bake. So I hate cooking, but I love baking. So I've been eating a lot of glutenated food, wheat, you know, all the things I shouldn't, that's bad for my autoimmune system. I've been just happily eating because the plasma treatments actually help my body. So I feel better. But, you know, wear and tear on this body after you're eating gluten, I started having muscle spasms, muscle jerking, and I had to check in with a neurologist, and they're like, this looks like stiff person syndrome or myoclonic jerks. They're like, whatever you've been eating, whatever you've been doing, you got to stop, because this is literally, sometimes I feel like my muscles might be pulled out from my joints and stuff. So I had gone in for muscle testing and nerve conduction studies at the hospital in Vancouver. They stuck a needle in my muscles. Ooh. Perfectly healthy. They're like, your nerves look good, your muscles look fantastic, because they did the EMG and nerve conduction study. They're like, this looks fantastic. How can you have stiff person syndrome? But they're like, oh wait, you know, it could be at early stages, so it's not showing up in the physical body. It might show up in the antibodies of the blood work for glutamatic decarbolase antibodies. It's a long name. And there's another one, neoplastic neurological disorders. So I went into the outpatient lab for the blood work at the same hospital, because they don't do it locally. If you just go to any old blood bank or any old lab, they won't test for it because it's out of province. It costs money. They won't do it. Right. But at the hospital, because the neurologist ordered it, I went in, they took a lot of blood, and I'm waiting for the results if I have stiff person syndrome or not, if I overdid it with my gluten intake and I caused myself to be Stiffy the Stifferson, basically. Just knowing things about genetics and antibodies and how the body works, just knowing this, the knowledge I have, I was able to get the medical testing that I needed to see if I'd done damage to myself or not.
Well, and think about this too, right? So let's take this, like, let's extrapolate this out like a couple of steps down the line, right?
Yes.
So let's say that you look at, let's say they do an actual disclosure, like what Corey has talked about, Corey Goode, where they said they have all these records, where like what Peter has said, where he's like, you know, the stuff that Corey has is essentially what ACIO has, right? Mm-hmm. If they were to disclose that stuff, saying all these people were in fact in the programs and to what capacity they were in the programs, right? At that point, they could say, okay, well, now we know we have this whole group of veterans that have to be dealt with in a certain way, right? We also know what their medical probabilities for certain types of exposures are, right? Mm-hmm. What the percentage probability of exposure is. And also too, what the LD50 is for certain issues, right?
Yeah.
At that point, they can start addressing the medical side and the psychological side of all these veterans who've been harmed by these programs. I mean, think about this, right? Just in the U.S. military alone, 17 veterans a day commit suicide. That demographic is 1.7 times higher than any other demographic in the United States. And this includes first responders, police, fire, all these guys, right? The question is why? My supposition has always been that these military service members do not know they're being abducted and they're being used in the programs, which is creating higher levels of PTSD and stress, which in turn causes issues within the body. And it also means they come back from these programs or come back into the military, like I was, all of a sudden they start having all these secondary side effects of, like, you know, addictions and alcoholism and all that kind of stuff.
Or psychological programming. Corey Goode. Sure. I mean, it's hard to explain why he's gone after SSP assets and called them liars or fakes, why he's shared emails with me saying that I was never in the SSP. He said, top brass SSP checked and you were never in the SSP. I'm like, yes, I was. I don't believe you. Sorry. And then he was attacking me as a fake and a fraud. That's just me disclosing what happened in 2016 because I was one of the first to disclose this info. He went after me hard. I'm like, why is he doing that? And then I'm like, psychically scan him. It's programmed for him to do it. It's mind programming that he's acting upon.
So I guess if you look at like MKUltra and some of these like programming types, what we would call that individual, I'm not saying Corey is this from my own perspective. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
What I would call that personality type, if I had to look at it, again, I'm not a psychologist. I do work as a licensed counselor. I would say that they're probably, this person's working as what we call controlled opposition. So you have somebody who's embedded within a particular movement or organization, and they create an active go or no go. Yeah, I'll get it out eventually. Gate for how information's moved within that organization. And Corey's been that individual for a while. I mean, he's the guy that triggered me way back in the day. I actually questioned it for a really long time until I started looking back at my old PHR notes, and then I got a hold of Peter the Insider. And when I talked to Peter confirmed about 90% of what I already knew, and then some, because he's saying, well, all this is true plus blank. Yeah. I was like, oh, it's like he was naming stuff that I had never told anybody. Like not even close members of my family knew this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I actively engaged exchanging emails with Corey because I was quite curious about who Corey is as a human being and what kind of programming, SSP programming, does Corey have. And it's a typical manipulative, brainwashing SSP asset programming that a lot of us have. Because we've all been programmed, broken down, put together again, like emotional, psychological, physical abuse. We've all had it to a certain degree. And when I was exchanging the emails with Corey, I saw the manipulation factors. Red flags were raised for me, but I was so fascinated by these email exchanges. I just continued doing it with him for almost a month and seeing what the response was. And I'm like, wait for it. He's going to blow. And there he was. The programming went off. He went off on me, went after me, saying that I stole his experiences, that I was copying him, all this stuff. Like,
but the funny part is he's had the exact same thing, these exact same claims brought against him too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By multiple individuals. And the other part that I have an issue with, and this is where my issue comes into this, right, is that I had a channel that was reviewing and listening to some of my videos through Quantum Ripple Cafe and through James Rink. And they were completely misquoting me and Corey both. And I actually sent an email, like, again, I'm a Libra. So I went through and I bullet point by bullet point, noted where their video was all screwed up, right? What they misquoted. And I even corrected them on some of Corey's stuff too. I'm like, Corey never said this. This is what he said. And why did you guys say this crap for? And of course, I like put all this stuff down, like bullet point by bullet point. I sent it to them. They said, can we forward this to Corey? And I'm like, sure, whatever. I don't care. And because the fact is that I think when Corey probably read that email, he knew that I was definitely somebody who had been in. He knew this at that point. Because there's certain terminology I used in there where I identified where I knew him from the programs and how I knew him. And when I said that stuff, he went, oh, because a month later when he's talking to Mike Sala, he's using the exact same terminology.
Yeah, well,
so
with him, it was gatekeeping, like trying to stop me from disclosing my experiences.
Right.
I mean, yeah, I've had similarities. I've went to Inner Earth. I've met Ancher type beings and groups. That's in a short story that was published in 2014. All the way down to the white and brown robes and all these councils, Inner Earth stuff. That's published in Canada Poetry Institute book, Short Stories Anthology. I'm not copycatting Corey. I have no desire to steal his experiences. We've all had our own and some similarities in things, the ET groups that we've met or been abducted or contacted by. It overlaps. I believe that Corey was in the SSP and still is in the SSP. He's an SSP asset. People are saying it's not true, that he's faking and frauding, but he's not. He is being what he truly is, an SSP asset.
I actually remember seeing him in it. That's why I'm making that point. And I actually told him where I saw him, what him and his guys were doing, and how they did it. And I actually spelled it out in that email very explicitly. This is what you guys did.
Yeah.
And he basically made a text comment in the bottom of the chat, because they had like a text chat running. It was a live chat. He basically said that he would not respond to anybody, either calling them out or not. That's what he said via the text chat response, right? And I was like, that's fine, whatever. I said, but I want to set the record clear based on your testimony and mine, with these guys who are misquoting our testimonies, because to me that's not fair to you, and it's not fair to me.
Yeah.
It's also not fair to the people listening to this too, right?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, in fair honesty and disclosure, I find him to be manipulative. He likes to do brainwashing. He likes to play games. That's how he is. That's fine. I found it fascinating, and it triggered me almost to be the same and participate in blackmail against him. I almost blackmailed him to get him to stop harassing me and attacking me. Just leave me alone, Corey. You do your thing, I'll do mine. But it was all the triggers from my SSP experiences that got activated when I interacted with Corey. And I was warned. I was sent anonymous emails saying, stay away from Corey. You don't want to deal with him because he'll come after you. I'm like, okay, well, I found him fascinating and I interacted with him. I shared my experiences. It started off, well, do you know where those Mars locations are, ICC locations? And then he's like, well, I'm going to vet you. Tell me your name, tell me where you were born, how old you are, send me your picture. I sent him my personal information. And then he came back, well, I vetted you and you were never in the SSP. I'm like, where's the official papers saying I was not in this SSP? You provide me with the legal papers, then I might believe you, but I don't. And then he exploded on me because he just wanted me out of the way. I'm not going anywhere. That's the truth of my experience with Corey. Simple. That's what it was.
So I'll put this. I'll put my part of the Corey Goode discussion to bed here with this statement. One, like you, I believe he was in. I believe he was a solar warden. In my experience, where I saw him in there, he did a rescue mission on our ship because the communication system on our ship had failed. He and 3 other guys came in. They replaced some modules within our communication system with our help. I was a security officer, so I'm watching over what they were doing. And I did not believe in any of this crap until he got on Cosmic Disclosure season 1 and I saw his face and I had that reaction where I'm like, I know you. I know that face. And I went and pulled my old PHR notes up, my post-hypnotic regression notes up, and I physically described him to the T. Secondly, I would say this. I was directly told by Peter to be very careful around Corey. Peter flat out told me, he's like, do not trust him, because Peter used to work directly with Dave Wilcock a lot. You look at like from the 2004 time frame till now, up until this year, Peter's been giving Dave all kinds of stuff. Like he's been getting from, the database stuff that he works in all day long. And for whatever reason, and this is exactly what I told Corey, by the way, in my email. I said, look, the database you've got a dump of is the same database that Peter's working from, has verified insiders from since he started doing this. So either A, this database, which you and Dave have been using since day 1 to verify people, and the same database you're using now to verify people is correct, which means I'm correct, being an insider, or B, you and Dave are full of crap, and that database is full of crap, and I'm full of crap. Which is it? Easy, real easy. And no response.
Yeah.
And the fact is that I know for a fact that Peter's right, because there's just been too many. I've actually, okay, so this is me being kind of a left brain Libra again, right? I look at what is the percentage of accuracy with someone when they give information out that can be validated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Peter has an extremely high degree of accuracy. So when you have someone like that who you work with, and for complete disclosure, I am actually considered an associate with ACIO. So with Peter's group, James Rink, myself, Anthony Zenders, a few of us are in that group that work with Peter. We're trying to get the right message out there, like what we're doing right now. So when I started talking to Peter, this is the reason why, because Peter and I, we had both served in Kruger together. And I knew when I started hearing his voice via Skype and via some other stuff, I was like, oh, I know exactly who this person is. I know the voice. And as soon as he started talking, you've heard interviews with him, I'm sure, with James Rings and Jessica Morocco and all these individuals, right? And
Yeah.
Peter's voice is very, very hard to like, it's really difficult to not know Peter's voice.
It's very distinct, and it has the Slavic European accent. I've talked to Peter. He's looked at my files and he's like, yeah, you served on Mars. You are telling the truth. So don't let Corey stop you from sharing your own story. Just stop engaging with Corey. The more you contact him, the more it triggers him to go on that attack after you. So like, just stop engaging. Do your own thing. Let Corey live his life, do his own thing. And, you know, it's dangerous when you try to seek validation from other people by getting them to validate you and vet you through email. Like, I'm horrified by what I did. I never should have sent Corey, never should have sent Corey Goode my full name, date of birth, where I was born, and my photo. That's private information about who I am. I never should have done that. It's dangerous. And okay, I guess I was dumb in 2016. I didn't know the pitfalls of what I was doing. But now I do, and I would never do that. I don't need to be verified or validated whether I was in the SSP or not. I have my memories. I know what happened to me, and that's enough for me. So I'm not searching anymore for validation.
So let's look at the secondary half of this too, right? So if people are wondering, well, you know, why is Johan saying these things, right? About, you know, dealing with this individual. Look at the three lawsuits that have all cropped up over the course of the last, 3 to 4 years between, you know, Jason Rice, the lady who lives down in Texas, who originally gave her testimony on Project Camelot, who a lot of people have said that Corey has copied. And then you got Randy Kramer, who Corey also has went after a couple of times, legally speaking, because of some of the terminology he used, which is where this whole thing about, you know, I'm trying to patent certain words argument came out of, right? Which I don't believe that actually went through the court system. But the point is that the idea is that if you have someone who's trying to do full disclosure, they would not be trying to do that behavior. It's that plain and simple, because what they're going to do, if someone's trying to do full disclosure, they want all the information out on the table from every party involved. Because from every single party, you can draw a large inference based on all of those experiences. They can say, well, you know what, we have a large overlay here of at least, you know, 1,000 experiences that all say, generally speaking, this is what happened. It's all approximately the same. By someone saying, you know what, that never happened, you were never there, you never did this or that, to me, that says that that person is not open to full disclosure. It's that plain and simple.
Yeah, I mean, Corey has sued his prior employer, Gaia TV. He sued Jay Widener, who was the producer of Cosmic Disclosure for most of the seasons.
Who's no longer there, by the way.
Well, yeah, because Jay quit because he has stage 4 cancer, medical reasons. So he quit on his own. It wasn't Corey that got him fired.
I'd also say this too, interesting side note, look at the backlash from Gaia when all that happened, right? If you go back and look at all the episodes from seasons 1 through 5, Corey's no longer in any of those. Corey and Dave have been removed.
Season 1 through 8, actually.
Yeah, but all that data's been edited out. They've removed those individuals. Have been removed, and now they've got Emery stuff in there, which I love Emery as a person. I think he's awesome.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think that it was interesting how Gaia essentially said, you know what, if this is the way you guys are going to play, then, and their data was essentially removed off of their platform. And Gaia has a right to do that. They have the right to protect themselves from indemnification. I'll get it out eventually.
Yeah, and slander and defamation.
Yes. Yeah, and basically, if they're trying to legally protect themselves from those things, then that's where they would remove the videos off their site.
Yeah.
And the ironic thing is, again, is that, like I said earlier, if you're a group of individuals trying to do full disclosure, you want all these people giving their experiences, regardless of whether they agree or not, to be out in the public domain. That way we can all go, this is where everyone overlaps, and these people are outliers.
Yeah.
And the overlapping is the higher probability of being real.
Yeah. I mean, Corey has no idea the people who send him emails and who he's really dealing with. He doesn't know the people themselves. He just saw me as a threat for disclosing something he didn't want out. He didn't know I had no plans on going on to Gaia and taping. Because of medical reasons, I can't even travel to Boulder, Colorado. Right. Even if I wanted to, I can't medically. So I was never a threat to Corey. I was just doing these types of interviews, what we're doing now online on my show. Nothing more, nothing less. So I was never going to interfere with his financials, with his popularity. I'm not a threat to anyone. So
yeah, I'm not either. I don't do any of these videos to make money. What I'm doing these videos for, again, is to get the information out there to people, to raise their conscious level awareness to what's going on.
Yeah.
I want people to think. That's what I want.
Me too. And everybody should be allowed to disclose what they need to or want to publicly through whatever means you want. We're not a threat to anybody. It's just a certain form of programming with Corey that I noticed that triggers him to go after people if he thinks that he's being threatened by individuals who aren't even out to get him. Nobody's out to get him.
I would also suggest too, as a final note with this particular area of discussion, right? Mm-hmm. Look at his discussion that he had with Mike Sala during his last set of videos when he was down in Texas at his friend's ranch, and he was talking about how he talked about Dave Wilcock. Look at the verbiage and the actual terminology he used in discussing Dave as his ex-business partner who he still has legalities with. So that phrase, quote unquote, should tell you a whole lot about what's going on there, right? And the bottom line is, regardless of what Dave and Corey have done or what stance they're currently in terms of business, I would hope that people like Corey would still allow folks like you and I to be out in the public forum giving our version of what happened to us. The simple fact, like I said, because the more people we have talking, the more correlation we have between data. Yep. And the bottom line is, and I know this just based on what I've heard Corey say, he is not comfortable with the whole super soldier talk side of this discussion, because everything he did was research and development, technical stuff. That's all he did. And he's not comfortable with this idea that they had military assets up in space doing actual military type missions. He's not. And he's made that very, very abundantly clear. But the problem is that's where the bulk of our space assets actually are. You know, I mean, you look at the size of the original Nakwaffen fleet, it was huge. So bigger than Solar War never was. So when you take a fleet that large and all of a sudden you say that none of these military missions happened across the board, even and the screwed up part is he himself has said on Gaia TV that they never had any data access to what Nakwaffen did. They never had any access to their databases. They never had any access to their personnel records, nothing. So how can he make an inference that these military super soldier missions never happened when he never had the actual data to make the actual discussion occur, right? And this gets back to a fundamental logical flaw in his statement again, right? Some of us, like me, have been in these programs, and the question is whether or not we want to discuss this for the basic uplifting of humanity. Once we know these programs are out there, we know how to process it and help people, right? Because you're a practitioner just like I am. And part of our job is to help people in every possible way that we can, right?
Yes.
So when we have someone who is limiting that disclosure to me, it really irks me. It pisses me off. And that's a button for me. It's like, why would you stop that layer of discussion when you know for a fact there are people out here who absolutely need help, even if they've never been in the program? Let's say we have someone who's a LARPer, right? Let's look at the far end example of this. Let's say we have someone who's a LARPer. How do we get that person help?
Yeah.
Right? How do we get them psychological help so they're good to go when all that's said and done?
Yeah, I've had people, because I do hypnosis, I do past life, I do soul retrieval, and when I look at people's memories, for them actively engaging in the hypnosis sessions, if I see SSP memories, I say, this is what I see in your memories, and also psychically see that this is what I see. This is only what I am seeing in your memories. I cannot change that. I cannot give you more information, more or less. This is what is in your memories that I can tell you about. And sometimes in the hypnosis, it's all based on questions that they send in to me for their sessions to explore. Memories, experiences, SSP, ET abductions, you know, sexual abuse, whatever it is, it's not just SSP. They get to see their memories. They get to walk it. They get to see it, experience it if they want, directly, indirectly. I cannot implant into their memories what is not there. If they've never been in the SSP, I will honestly tell them, I don't see that. Even if you want to be part of the SSP club, I cannot tell you that you are, because I don't see that in your memories. I cannot tell a person yay or nay if they don't believe me and choose to, they say to me, I'm sorry, you know, we've had the hypnosis session. I don't believe you. I was in the SSP. I will say, you have the right to believe whatever you want. It was your session. Whatever we saw or you saw in the session, that is what was in the session. If you still believe you're in the SSP, you are free to do so, because I'm not here to change anybody's mind. I'm not here to add anything or subtract anything. What you believe in is what you believe in, whether I see it or not in the session.
Right.
It's not up to me to like tell you, no, you're not that. I can't.
Right. And I would also say this too, right? So if we're going to go down that rabbit hole a little bit, right? We do have individuals who we talked earlier about controlled opposition, right?
Yes.
We have seen kind of an uptick in some of the groups on Facebook where you have folks come in and they act as what we call disrupting forces in some of these groups, that they will directly go after especially high profile people. Like if you or I have done videos, they would directly come at us in a heartbeat, because we're looked at as being people who are recognized within the SSP community, right? And immediately they want to go after those individuals, like verbally or otherwise. And I've seen me and Ted, some other folks who talked about this, where we've seen kind of this uptick in these individuals cropping up, where they join these groups and then all of a sudden this disruptive behavior kicks in. At some point in the middle of this discussion, all of a sudden you're like, what in the hell is this? And what it boils down to is that the trigger, the actual programming we talked about earlier, that trigger gets clicked.
Yeah.
And that individual starts acting on that programming.
Oh yeah.
And I can name a lot of instances. Like in my case, since I've started talking about this at the beginning of, I guess, last year, I've been doxxed twice at this point, right? The first time was really bad. It happened out of one particular group, and it was 3 moderators out of that group that did it, along with some other people that were kind of talking shit about me. The second attempt happened and I got Facebook involved, and their general counsel actually took action against the people involved immediately. Like as soon as I told them this is what's going on and this is a felony, they went, oh, because I've got documentation now on my computer where I've already got stuff saved when people try to dox me now. So like I just send out the copy of the federal law that says you can't do that, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, exactly.
And all of a sudden people go, oh, and these individuals were trying to dump all kinds of stuff. And Facebook was like, no, 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 no.
Oh, Facebook is very strict about if somebody's harassing you, if somebody's putting out your personal info, attacking you in text messages, Facebook will shut that down and give you a very stern warning. It's federal law that you are violating. Don't do it. Don't do it.
Yeah.
And I remember when one of the administrators added you to the SSP groups, several, you asked me to remove you, and I did it right away. As one of the admins there, I respected you, no questions asked. You said you were being doxxed and harassed and threatened, and your other family members. I'm like, no problem. I'm removing you. No problem.
Well, and that was the lead up to the first one I was talking about. The second one happened after we started doing the Quantum Red Pill Cafe videos. I had some individuals who, again, came out of that same group, started throwing a whole bunch of stuff into trying to do that on Facebook. And I was getting all these messages via Facebook messengers from people saying, you know, look, we know all this stuff about you. And it's like, what the hell's going on? You know, it was almost like as if they didn't want to accept the idea that there are people out there who've got a much larger picture of what's actually happening. Because where I was considered an executive level officer. You know, I sat as an aide de camp to the guy who ran Knockwaffen. All right. So what that means is I saw all the big picture stuff because I was head of operations. So I saw everything. And when people start getting into this whole argument about, well, this individual's not a reputable source. They're contravening everything this other person told me, blah, blah, blah. Well, look at what these two individuals are telling you, right? Which one do you resonate the most with, right? That's what I would tell you. Because a lot of times when I look at the number of people who viewed our videos, when Ted and I have done them, when James and I have done them, when you and I have done them, every single time I have people that'll email me and say, I really resonated with what you said because you're no BS kind of person, and I really like that about you, and you're very direct.
Yeah.
And that is exactly why I think when you have someone who's been in, they're not going to BS around about what they do or don't know. They're just not.
No. Yeah, there's certain terminology that I know that I've put out, my experiences that, and I type it into the internet search engine. I don't find other people discussing it. Only myself and you and all the other people I've talked about it with it and used the terms. My own videos keep popping up. So, not here. I don't like gatekeeping. I'm all about gathering intelligence and information and putting the puzzle pieces together because I want to make the connections. What you did, what I did.
And I have friends who still work in the government and federal government. I have friends that still work in some of the alphabetical soup agency groups. They're members of my old fraternity. I still am very good friends with them. And as friends of mine, I still consider them to be awesome people. And occasionally they do either email me or call me and they'll say, hey, look, we need to chat. And usually when that happens, that's when we start having these conversations about information that doesn't fit the normal paradigm. And I have a couple of these guys who I absolutely believe were in the programs or they know people who were, because of exactly what you just said. This whole idea of terminology, vernacular, and protocol starts coming up in the middle of their conversations. I'm like, whoa. Okay, so you're definitely talking to somebody who was in or you were in, one of the two.
I love procedure. I love protocol. I love medical experiments. That doesn't just come out of thin air. It comes out of the personality that I was in the SSP.
Yep. And I would say this too, right? So a lot of times when you look at stories, I'm going to use that in quotes, okay? Mm-hmm. Stories are being purported by certain people who are talking about their SSP experiences. When you start seeing, especially stories around these ideas of self-aggrandization and other stuff like this, mm-hmm. when the ego is getting involved, that's where those of us who've been in we've been in the programs, we know what's going on. We tend to kind of look at that and go, someone's fishing. There's storytelling there a little bit.
Yeah.
But the idea is exactly what you said. Is like, well, that's their experience. I'm not going to judge.
No, no.
But I would recommend is this: people that are listening to us right now, listen to what's going on there. How does that story actually make you feel, right?
Yeah.
How does that individual, how does that resonate with you when you hear them talk to you?
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
that's going to make or break the difference.
exactly. If you don't resonate with what I'm discussing, that's fine. Don't have to, don't need to.
Right.
I mean, I struggle sometimes with ego. I struggle with aggressive behavior. I struggle with manipulation and the brainwashing from the SSP from my own experiences. I'm a human being and I struggle with those things sometimes. Not perfect. I'm not a guru. I'm not anything. I'm not out to create an empire. No, just a small person who's had experiences. That's it.
Right.
I don't have the best equipment to do videos with. I have just Zoom, headphones, mic, and some office lighting that's not even fantastic, but that's what I have to work with. Those are the tools basically, because we're presenting information. It's not precisely what we look like or how much we have to work with. It's the info coming out from us.
Right. I agree.
I also was fascinated because you mentioned you had been on a Jupiter space station, and can you describe what that was like, getting back to the space
So
stuff?
there's two locations I've been at around Jupiter. One was on one of the moons, and one was actually in this location where they did the actual radio repair. So that is the station that we're talking about where the radio repair occurred is in what they call pocket space. It's actually a hyperdimensional pocket space. And in order to enter that pocket space, you have to do what's called punching in, which means you actually bring your ship up to a certain speed, punch into that location, and you immediately stop when you get inside the space. And we were told to go there because A, if somebody from Earth was observing, they wouldn't see us. And B, more importantly, that station was considered neutral space. So even if Solar Warden had an issue with us, they wouldn't attack us there, right? And that's where Corey and his three friends came aboard and did our radio repair stuff, was at that station. That was actually an ambassadorial station that actually orbits the North Polar region above Jupiter. And it looks kind of like a weird, like a spoon-shaped space station, sort of, except what the other end also has a little circle on it. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
I think Randy Kramer has discussed it as well.
Yeah, and they do a lot of ambassadorial stuff there with people from outside our solar system, and with people in the programs also go there too. The second location was one of the moons around Jupiter, and that specific station is used as a genetic where they do like cloning. So Monarch, specifically Monarch Security Solutions LLC, they run their own genetic cloning and manipulation programs on that moon. And as Kruger, they sent us in to actually retrieve a particular doctor who had left Kruger to go work for Monarch. And my commanding officer got the order to go retrieve her. So he sent me and my three guys in to go get her. And it was very strange because when you're in a 2.0 body, right, you're 7 to 8 feet tall, extremely muscular, and you're carrying all these weapons and armor. I remember walking in there, and I remember the security people, if you show them the orders you have, they don't ask questions when you walk into a station like that. They go, "Oh, this is being directly," because the orders were directed straight from the ICC super board to us. And here I am showing them, saying, "Look, we have a direct order to go talk to this person." And we walk into the office. It's the four of us walk her back into her office. We shut the door, and magically she's tagged and bagged. And we take the tag and bag out with us when we left.
Was she alive or?
She was until she got to the LFC, yes.
Oh, and the 7-foot body, was that a clone or cyborg? What were you in?
That was actually a clone body, yes. They used those bodies because they were genetically altered specifically around the idea of more muscle mass, higher stamina, higher speed. They could also handle the higher vibrational frequency. So when you do what they call MK Ultra level programming, there's really 4 layers of MK Ultra level programming, right? All the way from super soldier all the way up to what they call informationer, which I've done all 4. And essentially, in order to operate at those frequencies, you have to have a body that can actually handle that vibrational frequency in terms of what you're doing. So, and what I mean by that is this, right? So let's say you're using psionic abilities, right? As they call a Leitzodaten, which is a light warrior, right? What would happen is I would, in my head, think light it up, and this ring of light would show up around my hand, and when I hit something, it would actually punch a hole clean through whatever that object was, right? One of the examples I gave at that talk in Nevada was that I had, when I was in Kruger, I was getting switched from Kruger to MDF. They were rebuilding my right leg, and I woke up in the tube while they were doing it, and I didn't want to be there. So what I did was I created this light ring around my fingers. I started cutting a hole through the glass in the tube, and the doctors were freaking out. They're like doing this thing like, shut it down, you know? And that's what happens in those bodies is that you don't have any more of these physical inhibitions about using that energy and being able to channel that energy anymore. The genetics are directly in line with your psionic abilities to channel that energy as needed. So you don't have there's genetic inhibitors in some genetic families here on Earth, and they're purposely placed there. And more to the point, if you look at what we call the metagene, which is that group of genes, the genomes, that allow you to have psionic abilities, the more of those genes you have, the higher the probability are that you're probably working as a practitioner here on Earth, or you've been in the programs up there. That combination of genes is extremely important to the people off world.
Yeah, and I mean, being a psychic practitioner, healer, honestly, the burnout factor happens to us too. We're not solidly perfect, and
right.
There's wear and tear, honestly, on these abilities. So I always say, if you want to be a healer, a psychic, just there's a lot of things that go into it that most people have no idea going in, how hard it can be to do that type of work. So it's not the easiest work to do.
Well, and look at channelers too, right? So you and I, we both channel, and
yes.
What is happening is that when you have someone who's working at these super high vibrational densities, right? It essentially wears out your nervous system over time. And what happens is you may be channeling something for 2 or 3 days, and you're at an event. You come home and you crash for a day. You can't even talk or walk. Right?
Yeah.
You get to the point where you can't even deal with people for a certain amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, I've been torturing myself trying to work with different LED lights to improve my video quality, and I burn out after like working 15 minutes with them because these LEDs are just not natural lighting, and it hurts me. So I'm like, I've sent back 15 different LEDs through Amazon. It's not that I don't like it. The lighting is nice. It just hurts me, and I feel like I'm dying, literally. It just is bad on my body. And I mean, and some of it just functionally wasn't the best tools to work with. Some of the stuff broke on me. Like, I got it in the packaging and it broke. So I sent it back. I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm like,
but this gets back to what we were talking about earlier, right? So when you have people who've been in the programs, they're going to have certain both mental and physical triggers they have to work with, right?
mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, it's extremely important, if you believe that you were in the programs, seek out help medically and with someone who can help you through hypnosis, try to help you make sense of what's going on. Because as you do that and open that door, the more knowledge you have from that you're giving yourself, the more armed you are in dealing with whatever the problem is, big picture wise. And a lot of times I didn't know what I was going through until I started looking back to my old PHR notes, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. This fits the exact narrative that Corey's talking about, except I was in some other groups.
Yeah. You had experiences on the Hyperion. What is the Hyperion, and what did you do there?
That was one of the stations that was originally built by the Tall Whites for the U.S. Army back in the 60s. Hyperion was then sort of taken over by the Russians for a little while, and eventually was taken back over by the ICC when the Red Rising Star program failed. And the Hyperion looks like 1950s technology kind of orbiting in space, which is kind of funny if you think about it. it's like really run down, kind of ratty environment. But the idea is that it is designed to keep people alive while orbiting above certain locations in space. Now, the way the tall whites developed that station is it can actually be moved. It has the ability to do a pinpoint jump. It can move from place A to place B. And the last location I remember seeing them in was in an area in Talsetti, which they may have moved since then, but they were actually helping with a mining issue that was there. They were actually assisting with some people who were mining in that area, and some mantids actually had attacked some of our colonists who were doing the mining there. Now, the Hyperion itself essentially is not Earth tech. Let's be clear about this, right? It is non-terrestrial. The engines, the drive system, all of the interfacing stuff is non-terrestrial. It's all designed by tall whites, taught by us, by them, and that's how it works.
Interesting. Have you ever had alters?
Yes. So the name I'm currently using for your video, Johan Fritz, is one of my alters. He went through Kruger, MDF, and Knockwaffen in Alliance. I had a secondary alter that I know of. His name is Victor Kamakov, also in Kruger. Peter told me that that particular individual was well known as an assassin and a sniper and a hitman. And specifically, he did a lot of work in Eastern Bloc, Europe and Russia and elsewhere. So the idea is that once you have an individual with a certain baseline of information, right? Let's say that individual's been trained how to use all these weapons, right? Once you fractionalize them, you can say, you know what, we want to take this baseline info, we want to copy it into this alter, another alter ego, right? Contain it, and then give this other alter ego a new name. And then we're going to program with new languages, new background, new basis, whatever, right? That's when you start seeing this whole other alter ego show up, right? So, and to answer your question directly, yeah, I've had at least 2 that I know of by name. I've been told by other people there were more than that, but I've never had them show up in any of my regressions or anything like that yet.
Yeah, I've never had alters show up. I know that I've done a lot of things in the SSP, different jobs, but I always remember it being me. I never remember different names, different alters. So is it typical for people to have alters, or can you just be you and you never had alters in the first place?
It depends on, again, the program, right? So typically with Kruger, you're in a 2.0 body, which means your 1.0 body was put in cryostasis. That way, if the 2.0 body ever died, your soul fragment would rehome back to the original cryostasis body, and it could copy you back out. It's kind of like having like a game reset or a save place in your game, computer game. You know, you've now rehomed back to your body. You know where you got shot and died from, so they can send you back out there, and they know exactly where you're going to die next time. You try to avoid that, right? That's exactly what happens in Kruger. They use 2.0 bodies for that reason, because they're usually high risk missions. MDF, Knockwaffen, Alliance did not use clones. As a matter of fact, MDF and Knockwaffen specifically were very against using clones and cyborgs in a lot of cases, but they had what they called special need cases where they would use cyborgs. We would actually send cyborgs in to clean out bases, and those cyborgs were very good at just literally removing any life form inside that base. And that's where we would use them at, is in those locations. So depending upon the program you're in, would determine whether or not you're inside your body, inside of a 2.0 body. Now, in MDF, Knockwaffen, and Alliance, I'm inside my 1.0 body. Inside Kruger, I was inside a 2.0 body because they needed me, my brain, my essence, inside that 2.0 body.
Yeah, people ask me, do I have alters? And honestly, I've never had anything come up or anything appear as alters. What would your personal opinion of me be? Like, do you see me as the type to have alters, honestly, or what do you think?
I think the answer is yes. And a lot of times what happens is that people don't have a recall of the name or the information because it's kind of like a lock to a, it's like a key to a lock. Unless you have that key, that name, you can't get the other information. So a lot of times people, that information is hidden from them and they don't know what it is. And what's happened with me is, for example, I've had friends of mine who they've actually directly recognized me through some of these groups on Facebook. Like I was talking to some people, and for example, look at Ted Alexander and Will Glover, right? These two individuals are like, we know you because we sat in meetings with you and the old man. Like they were like very direct about it. Like we know you. And I'm like, what? And all of a sudden they start talking about certain memories. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. Now what I remember is this. And Will Glover's like, yeah, it's exactly that and this. And he's like finishing the sentence. So this is where this idea of confirmation comes in, right? But at the same time, Will was not Will Glover in that situation. He had another alter name. That information was contained within a pocket area of his subconscious that resided all those memories, all those thoughts, all that behavior, and the linguistics behind what was going on, like with me. Johan's the same way. He's a pocket part of who I am. Yes, he is me, but he's also not me, because he can do things through my physical body or another body that I can't do. Or maybe I just haven't accessed that part of me yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look at some of the super soldier abilities that people talk about, you know, you think about this, right? So if you take someone who's been through all the super soldier stuff that I've been through, if you're allowing that person to have those abilities down here, they would be functionally equivalent to a demigod because of their strength, their speed, their intelligence, the way they deal with people, their combat abilities, their instincts, their reflexes. It's completely outside the normal paradigm for human beings.
Yeah, I've never been a super soldier. I always did the tech stuff, the technology, the information. I mean, I have battle ready training and I have weapons, semi-automatics, things that, you know, I have no use for, but I have. So I have the training and it's called Viking class. Planetary Corp provides you with Viking class training, whether you will be in battle or not, you're just trained to be battle ready for anything on Mars. But I never engaged in fights. I never really did any of that mission type of stuff.
Yeah, see, that was everything I did. So I mean, you know, they're like, we need you to take out this target, and they would send a guy like me with a bunch of other guys like me, and women, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the programs are 50-50 almost in terms of the mix between men and women, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knock Waffen being one of them, by the way. But they would send us in a combat, and you know, we're expected to kick ass and take names. You know, I was a ground pounder. I was considered a grunt. So for me, if I was being deployed, somebody on the other end was about to have a very, very bad day.
Mm.
Because I'm coming down, I'm kicking their teeth in.
Well, I'm all about the genetics. Give me a genetics lab and I will be a happy creature. I'm all about the medical stuff, genetics. To this day, it's an addiction, it's an obsession. I'm fascinated with it because I have all this knowledge that I'm not even implementing for anything useful other than treating myself medically to be better and healthier. So what would you say to people who have urges to do things like work in medical labs that are obsessed with certain types of genetic stuff? Like, how can you, if you have those desires, what can you do about it?
I would say that in some cases that may be the person channeling or bringing up old knowledge they already have, right? Secondly, do research. Do your due diligence and do research. That means reading books. That means talking to experts and specialists. That means talking to doctors. That means talking to people who are in the field, right? Thirdly, I would say make sure that before you decide to do something, make sure that what you're trying to do sounds reasonable, right? I hear people all the time talking about using CRISPR-9 and doing all kinds of crazy stuff to their bodies, and I'm like, before you do that, maybe you should check to see if that's a reasonable response. Just to be clear. Because when you start tweaking with genetics, you don't totally understand what that genome really could do in relation to other genomes around it, which is why we were talking about the whole metagene idea earlier, right?
Yeah.
If you flick one gene off, all of a sudden that meta gene is turned off, which is why you have some people in our world who don't have psionic abilities. So is that something you really want to tweak with? So
I mean, honestly, if I was given access to medical labs to do genetics and all that, I'm sure I'd be like a bull in a china shop, happily working and doing that stuff, because that's what I did in the SSP, and it still obsessively compulsively comes up because I do stuff on myself medically, tests and stuff to just try to figure out what I can improve health wise, but I do it through the medical system. I'm not afraid of medical system or alternative medicine. I use both because they have both advantages and disadvantages.
right.
So what would you say, recommend to people first coming out?
Okay, so about people coming out to the big world, right?
Yeah.
I did it the wrong way. I'm just gonna be blunt.
Mm-hmm.
When I initially first started talking about some of the stuff I went through, I did it the completely wrong way. I came out using my actual name initially, and that's where I got doxxed. So that's the reason why I'm currently using one of my alter IDs as the name that I speak under publicly. So here's what from my experience, here's what I will say. One, if you have family, if you have children, if you have significant others and people who are dependent on you for safety, for income, for security, you need to think very hard and very carefully about what do you really want to step into this arena. Because there are people we've already talked about who will actively go after you and try to completely, utterly destroy you in the social media and in direct in-person interviews and all kinds of stuff. Secondly, I would say if you decide to come out, if you still feel your message is important enough to come out like I did, then you have to figure out how to safeguard both the people you care about and yourself enough so that you're creating kind of a barrier between them and you, right? I speak under my Ultra ID for that reason, because if you look up that name, Johan Fritz, it brings up all these guys in Germany who are very pissed off, looking like they need a beer. Okay, it's not me, but the bigger picture is that I'm doing that because that creates that safety buffer until I'm ready to actually come out under my real name.
Well,
and that's where as a responsible adult, I have to think about other people, not just me, right?
Yeah.
There are some people who don't have any sort of siblings or children or significant others, and maybe they feel the need to immediately come out. Well, understand this too, right? So if you come out, you could turn off the very people you're trying to have in your life as well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Indeed.
I've experienced that firsthand in terms of family. I have seen situations occur where you're trying to have a conversation about something and people are just like, nope, I'm not having it. And I follow what I call the 10% rule, which means I give them 10%. If they still look like they're listening to me, I'll continue telling them more stuff until they give me the deer in the headlights look, the glazed over, what are you talking about look, And in most cases, people in my family, they don't want to hear about this stuff because they don't believe it's real. They don't have any sort of buy-in into it. But I know from my own experiences, I know where I've been and how I've been there. And the way I look at it is, it's not my job to convert people. It's not. It's my job to put my story out there and let people hear it. And if they choose to accept that story, great. If they choose to not accept it, that's fine too. Again, I'm not here to proselytize to people about the saving powers of the SSP or anything, quote unquote.
No, me neither.
But the idea is that what I would say is that safety is number one. That is the number one thing that you have to really closely look at. If you have people, especially people that are could be medically at risk, do not risk coming out. I'm just going to be flat out blunt with you. Do not do it. Because there is a possibility that that can be used against you and your spouse or you and your significant other later on down the line.
Do you mean medically at risk, like mental health disorders, or?
Well, I mean, you know, if you have someone who has a genetic disorder, right? Or if you have someone who has a very severe medical issue that has to be constantly remediated all the time, if you have someone that has medical health issues that you're constantly working with, or let's say you have children who may be autistic, for example, all of these things fall into that category of this really needs to be safeguarded because these individuals are what we call innocents.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have a finger in the fight. Mm-hmm. And in my case, what happened the first time I got doxxed was that these individuals that came out of this one group were targeting me and my significant other at the time because of the fact that I had said some stuff that they didn't happen to agree with. And because I got appointed as an admin, apparently. I don't know. Whatever. The point is that when they started coming after me, they weren't attacking just me at that point. They were attacking someone who was a complete innocent in the situation.
Yeah.
And that's where, in my opinion, I have to look at this now. You know, now that I'm in the process of getting my divorce done, and I have to look at this in terms of when I step into a dating relationship, I want the person that I'm with to absolutely understand that there are certain safety concerns when I talk about this stuff, and them understanding what the potential outcomes are in case something goes sideways. We had it happen in Nevada, actually. When we were in Las Vegas, we had two individuals come in the room. I knew for a fact these individuals were alphabetical soup intelligence people. One was CIA, the other was Mossad, and they were absolutely listening to everything James and I were saying until I started actually enlarging my auric field around James and I first, because one guy I think was trying to attack James. He was talking.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, this James kind of looked at me. He's like, "Did you do that?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And then we start talking. He starts talking some more, and all of a sudden, his ability to talk became much easier because he wasn't being directly affected so much.
Yeah.
And then I started dipping into the person who was doing the attack. I started dipping into his brain. I'm like, "Who are you? Why are you here? And why are you doing this behavior?" And all of a sudden he said, "Well, I'm Mossad." And I'm like, "Then you need to leave the room." And the guy literally got up and walked out of the room. And at the end of the talk, James kind of looked at me. He's like, "What the hell was that?" I'm like, "Well, these two individuals, I kind of poked them a little bit."
Yeah, I do that all the time. If I feel threatened by somebody who is inappropriate for whatever reason, I make myself larger than life. I'm like, I'm nasty energy. Go away. Just turn around and walk out of here. Because I'm 5'5", but sometimes people just look at me and they want nothing to do with me. The people that I don't want close to me, that's what happens to them. I'm like, I send the message, walk, leave. You're not welcome here. Go.
So what I would say is, again, right, you're going to have these instances where if you do decide to come out, safety is now paramount, right? You know, when you're in this situation where you've got other people who are with you and their safety is dependent on whether or not you can or can't talk about this subject, it becomes extremely important about how you manage, maintain, and compartmentalize that information.
Mm-hmm.
So in my case, again, I'm using an alter ID because I don't want my actual name out there right now. I've got too much other stuff going on that I don't want that being affected.
Yeah.
And the thing is that that's a personal choice for me, right? Others have decided to not do that. And in some cases they've done okay. You look at Jason Rice up until Corey starts suing him, right? And that's, again, this is one of the side effects. If you put your real name out there, you can be directly targeted by people who are, you know, wanting to do that kind of sort of thing.
Yeah, and if you look at those lawsuits, I don't think they're going to turn out that well in court. Oh, look, aliens and SSP. The judge is going to look at that and go, "Are you kidding me? Really?
Yeah, what?
You're suing over what?"
Right.
Man, you need to go get some therapy for this stuff.
Well, even more to the point, if we're talking about linguistics and vernacular, which is what the basis of the lawsuit is, the copyright that Corey has been trying to get over the terms never actually went through.
Mm-mm.
It's still being challenged in court, actually. So if he were to take Jason to court over this, he's going to lose, as it currently stands.
Yeah.
So I mean, this whole thing about him trying to control the narrative, as it were, is not going to happen. It's just not going to happen.
I mean, it makes it dangerous for us just saying his name because he might go after us. I hope he doesn't, but that's how things have been. Just saying the name is not healthy.
Well, it's exactly what I said earlier. Peter approached me when I started doing some of my videos with James and with Ted. He approached me and he said, "Hey, look, just so clear." He's like, "I'm here trying to protect you." So
yeah,
he goes, "There's certain people that you need to be very, very cautious around. Some people are spreading straight up disinfo. They're not putting the right info out there." He's like, "I think you are." He's like, "Because I used to serve with you and I know you." He's like, "More importantly, because there are people who are considered controlled opposition, and they are actually doing that exact behavior right now with you."
Yeah.
He's like, "You need to be very careful."
Yeah. I mean, Corey was in the SSP, still is in the SSP, perhaps. I fully believe his story. What I don't agree with is him going after other people and trying to stop them from disclosing. That's the only thing I don't agree with, and I wish him all the best. I have nothing against Corey.
And I've said the exact same thing, by the way. When I sent my email to Revan Rising, which is the channel we were talking about earlier, I directly said that in the email. I said, "Look, I have nothing personally and negatively against Corey. Nothing. Without him, I wouldn't have came forward. Okay, because he validated some of my stuff that was in my sessions. More to the point, I think that based on the fact that he opened up the door for discussion around all of this stuff, I think that, in my opinion, he's done a great service to humanity in that regard. Again, I have nothing negative against Corey. I don't. I have nothing negative against the guy. But where I have an issue is when you start having people creating frivolous lawsuits, trying to control the narratives, trying to control money. That to me is all ego crap.
Well, I think he wants to be recognized for the work that he did, and the fact that he doesn't have access to that work anymore is frustrating. Right. And when it's your life mission and that's what you dedicated your life to do, that's what he's dedicated to do. So,
right.
I guess all sides, there's many sides to the story. I don't know Corey personally. I only know through the emails and just the behavior that I experienced. But I think that's a lot of programming. That's part of his programming, and that's it. It's what makes him do what he does. Some of my programming makes me do what I do. I have programming. I admit it. Not perfect, but what would you say has been the most important thing to you through these experiences?
I would say first off and foremost, it's really caused me to refocus and redouble my efforts on working on me internally. Specifically around the programming and trigger side of things. When I'm dealing with my interpersonal relationships right now, there are certain triggers that have definitely shown up again and again and again. And I think sometimes the reason why that happens is because the universe and your guides and other folks, your family, they're trying to get you to improve, right? And at the time, we don't look at that as them trying to coach us to improve. We look at that as an irritant. And I would say it's the number one lesson that I took out of this whole thing. When I came out, I realized that if I'm going to be somebody who can help other people, I've got to get me internally in here. I've got to get me right first. Secondly, and more importantly, I have to figure out what's truth and not truth. I said this in Nevada too, when we talked in Las Vegas, where there's this whole idea. I normally wear a metal wristband around my wrist. I tug on it occasionally because there are times where things will happen. In my head, what I'm thinking, is this real or not real? Because I'm trying to figure out in my brain what's going on, because my wristband never shows up in my memories. So for me, it's like one of these things where it's like this control item for me. I can tug on that and go, okay, this is real. I'm definitely here. I physically feel it. I'm good. Right? It's like a comfort thing for me. Now, other people may have other ways of doing that, right? Some people, they drink alcohol. Some people, they smoke. Some people, they go for walks or work out or whatever it is you do. You need to make sure that one, it's healthy for you. And two, more importantly, it's actually helping you to become a better version of you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the smoking and the drinking aspect and the drug use aspect of this, I don't think help us become better versions of us.
No.
That's just my personal belief. I realize other people may have a difference of opinion there. And that's their choice. They're adults. They can do whatever they want to do. Because I've actually fought both smoking and alcohol addiction myself and gotten through it. As of May this year, I am 25 years alcohol free. So that being said, I would also state that the last point I would make on this is that once you've gotten yourself to the point where you're good with you, who you are internally, or at least getting there, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you choose to help other people? How do you choose to put that forward, right? That's why I do these videos, because I realize that many times by me talking and someone seeing me, they're going to be like, wait a minute, I recognize this person, or maybe I know who this person is, and it causes them to delve into some of their own memories and maybe start doing the internal work they've been asking to do all along, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, people have questioned my motives. I did monetize my YouTube channel a while ago when everybody was so afraid that their channel would be taken away if it wasn't monetized, and I kept it. All my videos are monetized. I'm not doing it to earn scads of money, because I'm not a professional YouTube creator, content creator. It's just monetized, and honestly, it's not profitable at all. It hardly makes anything, and that's not what I'm in this for. But it's, people say you have so many ads on your videos, like, why don't you just remove the monetization in the ads? It's a YouTube channel algorithm. Almost all YouTube content creator videos are monetized.
Right.
You can skip the videos, skip the ads. I mean, I did it because I didn't want to lose my YouTube channel. I honestly did it. And if you ever, sometimes I've been uploading videos and then I accidentally delete 20 of my videos. It was an accident. I've done it 4 times. Because my channel is monetized, I can contact YouTube customer support and help to bring those videos back. If my channel wasn't monetized, I would not be able to do that. That's a hard lesson I've learned. So it's not financial gain at all that those ads are there or it's monetized. It's just how YouTube is these days. So,
well, and again, think about the third point I made, right? So while you and I may not realize who we're helping, we do know that there are people that contact us that absolutely, they say, you know what, I watched your video, I've listened to you talk,
yeah,
I've done whatever, and I resonate here in my heart space with whatever it is you're saying, and they immediately want to talk to you. And to me is a good sign, because what that tells me is that those individuals are starting to kind of wake up a little bit to the idea that they absolutely need to get with someone. And I'll say this for the record, right?
Mm-hmm.
The three methodologies that I would tell people to go through if you're trying to gain, maybe even 4 methodologies that you go through to gain some of this knowledge we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
The first is what they call quantum healing hypnosis therapy, QHHT. Brennan Healing Schools taught that. You can look that up online. Many of their practitioners are here in the US, Canada, overseas. The second methodology is what they call PHR, post-hypnotic regression. I recommend finding a practitioner who's metaphysical, not an atheist. Okay, I'm saying this for a reason, because the practitioners who tend to be more atheistic have a real problem when we start talking about shit out in space.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why that's the case, but they do. To find someone who tends to be more of a metaphysician, someone who's more spiritual, right? Third methodology would be a shamanistic soul retrieval. which I have had done to me because I've a certain piece of information I've had to gain, and I know other people who practice it and are very good at it. The fourth methodology that I would say is actually have someone, for example, what you do with remote viewing, right? Do a remote view on the situation and see, well, how does this balance up with what the narrative is that I'm being told, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in many cases, one of these four methodologies would be a methodology that person could listen to later on, and they would have the ability to review that information and say, well, do I resonate with that or not? And that's where doing the internal work comes into play.
Yeah, I have a hardcore rule. If anybody does a session, any type of session with me, it's always recorded and they can get a copy of it if they want. It's for their own protection and mine, because when I put in the work for the session, I want the person to get the benefit out of the session, the healing, the remote viewing, the hypnosis, whatever it is always recorded on video. It's not an invasion of privacy. It's just for the record, for that person's session record. And it's kept off of my computer. It's not on my internal computer. It's in a safe hard drive that's locked away because it's client sessions. So I believe you get the full benefit out of having a record of your session. All the hypnosis sessions, Dolores Cannon, quantum healing hypnosis, either video and audio, is always recorded for you. So you have a copy of what your healing was, what you went through.
They always take notes that you're recording. So
yeah,
either way.
Yeah. And what would you say to people who have YouTube channels and, if they monetize it, it's not that you're greedy and you don't want to do the work for free. Like, what do you say to people who say, oh my God, you've become part of the mainstream media, you're out for the money for it?
So as a practitioner, what I would say is I believe in this idea of free energy exchange, right? So or equal energy exchange, right? So if somebody wants my service as a practitioner, they should be willing to compensate me for the time involved in me providing X service, whatever that service is, right?
Mm-hmm.
I see the YouTube stuff the exact same way. If you have somebody who's got a channel, they've monetized that, and they've decided that in order for people to watch them, if that's the route they want to go in, that's fine. Because if that person believes in fair energy exchange, equal energy exchange, then if you want to watch their videos and you believe that of value, then you should pay the value to watch that video. That plain and simple. It's nothing difficult.
Yeah, I mean, you don't even have to pay for it. It's just a Google ad that you could skip.
Right.
So,
but the idea is that you still have to go through the process of viewing that ad or exchanging that energy, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I believe in the exchange value of fairness, and we don't live in a free world society. We just don't. So it's just part of it. Whether it's energy exchange, finances, whatever, it's of equal value in exchange. I don't ask you for money to be on my show. You don't ask me for money to be on my show, because we know it's not about the money. If you ask for money, that's a barrier for not being able to do these shows. It's not appropriate. I would never.
Well, and again, it gets back to this whole idea of why are we really doing the videos in the first place? I'm trying to help people, trying to wake them up. I look at that as a zero cost to me, right? It's all about time for me. So if I'm willing to dedicate my time to talk to people about what I've been through, what I know, okay, that's easy. I can do that all day long. I can expound on that ad nauseum. But the bigger chunk of this is you do have people out there who not only do they want to charge, but they want to charge a huge amount of money for their content. And when people start asking about why the charge is so high, it's like, dude, why are you charging, $10, $15 a month to watch your videos, which last month were $7 a month or whatever. And by the way, just in case people are wondering, this is being directly aimed at Gaiam TV. So just so we're clear, when they first started out with $7 a month, it's now like 10 or 15 bucks a month, whatever it is, because they're trying to increase their revenue, their bottom line revenue, right? And I don't understand that at all, because you'd think if you're providing the exact same service over time, that the increased amount of participation from the people watching the videos would increase your revenue.
Yeah.
And it's not the case at Gaiam, by the way. The actual total number of people watching videos at Gaiam has steadily went down ever since all this fallout from the discussions around the secret space program stuff happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I mean, honestly, they could increase. I do business stuff. I do business work. I did go to school for business a little bit. I don't understand, why don't they have an online platform to interview people online, not just have them fly out in person? Like, it doesn't make sense. I don't understand.
So I've had some people reach out to me and ask the same question, right? For the record, if Gaiam wanted me to come out, I have no problem going out and talking to them. The thing that Gaiam wants to do, I believe, is this. And here's the bottom line. One, they want to see face-to-face who you are when they're talking to you, and how easy is it to interview you, right? Some people who you and I both know are not very easy to interview. They can be, we use the term difficult in quotes, okay? I could use some explicatives instead of the word difficult, and it would adequately describe their behavior. But the idea is that if they have someone who's easy to interview, right, that you can talk to them, then maybe that person's someone they bring on the show. Now, second part that comes up is, how believable are they? So when you have someone who's doing like this interview, right, and they're talking about, this is my experience, this is what I've been through, blah, 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 does that ring true to the people who are doing the interview and to the interviewer, right? That becomes a big discussion.
Yeah.
And thirdly, I would say the third thing is does this person, do they have a following? So for example, right, you look at certain people online who, when their videos are posted, they concurrently, and every single time their videos are posted, they get these high number of views every single time, right? These would be people who Gaiam would look at and go, okay, this individual's getting some draw because people resonate with whatever this person's saying, and they absolutely believe what this person's saying, and they also are asking lots of questions about what this person's saying, and we like that.
Yeah. Maybe it's the quality, like they don't want to do it online because the quality is not the same as in studio, because you never know whether the person has a good mic, some decent camera. I think it's quality issues of online, not being able to interview online as well.
Well, even more to the point, look at what happened with the last season of The Voice, right? So the way they did it, they actually had a setup where all the coaches were sitting in their homes, right? They never went in the studio because of COVID. And they went through and they basically did everything from their house. They even had people performing out of their houses, which is interesting to say the least. And they actually got the show off without a hitch.
Yeah, so, I mean, it wasn't perfect, but it was entertaining.
Sure. So, I mean, you have one of these situations where if you have the right technical people involved, the barrier to doing the show remotely like that all of a sudden becomes negligible. And that's where, in my opinion, I think Gaiam has fallen short in a lot of ways, because they're looking at this in terms of profit, not in terms of getting the message out. There's a lot of people in the metaphysical world that would benefit from having their message put on Gaiam. You know, look at Don Miguel Ruiz, for example. I think he's an awesome shamanic practitioner, but his stuff is never put on Gaiam because he and Gaiam can't seem to get their acts together when it comes to the two of them talking to each other, because he is very specific about how he wants to present his message. He wants it done in the right energy.
Yeah, and for me, it's a medical barrier. I can talk to you easily and interview people. I'm very good at interviewing and talking, and I remember all my memories and experiences. I'm a good talker. Physically, I can't go to Gaia because of my autoimmune issues, and they have too much radon gas in Colorado that would drive my autoimmune system up the wall, honestly. So physically can't go to Gaia TV. Would like to be interviewed, but can't. from a business perspective, I don't understand why they can't do online interviews. What, like The Voice did, Fox News even does it.
So there's only, I can think of 3 reasons why they wouldn't. And this is strictly from me having worked as a PI in the past. One, if you want to do lie detection on site, meaning using a lie detector test, polygraph, that's one reason why. 2, when I've interviewed people in the past, I'm actually watching their body language as much as I'm watching what they say, which my mom says can be a little unnerving because I'm watching what their feet are doing, I'm watching what their hands are doing, I'm watching how their body is talking along with what they're saying. And I think you miss that unless you have that person in there in person in front of you, right? Because sure, you and I can have a great conversation, but if you're going to put somebody on TV, you have to make sure that they don't fold under pressure. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally do.
Because somebody could walk in there and be completely anxious about doing an episode with Gaiam, and they get in front of the camera and all of a sudden they freeze up. Right? So that's one of those cases where, you know, what you're hoping is the person you're bringing in has the same eloquence when they talk, like what we're doing right now, also in front of the camera when you get them in front of the camera. That's what you're hoping for, I think, big picture wise, from a production and business standpoint. Secondly, what you're hoping for is that if this person has a huge following, I mean, people follow every video they post, then maybe this person will also have a huge following within their channel. And all of a sudden, at that point, you can use that as a way to expand and grow that person within the channel. And look at what happened to Emery, right? So when Dave left as the moderator for Cosmic Disclosure, Emery, who's done some of the show, they brought him right in, and he's now the moderator. He's done a great job, from what I understand. Yeah,
but it's hard to. You can't even do these types of interviews with Emery. He doesn't respond. You can't get him on a YouTube channel like you and I are doing.
Right.
It's all. I think there's a honorary fee to interview him, which is fine. That's his way of doing it, and it's fine.
But he may also have a non-compete agreement with Gaiam. And this is something else that people don't understand, right? So when you finally step into the TV realm, right? Some TV groups, some channels, and I believe Gaiam does this, they'll have you sign what's called a non-compete, which basically means that from that point forward, you will not broadcast any material related around, for example, we're talking about SSP stuff, right? You will not broadcast anything on any other medium that talks about SSP stuff until the term of that agreement is complete. And this is where both Dave and Corey had their arguments with Gaiam TV because they wanted to go out and do their own shows. They wanted to do CITV. They wanted to go out and do all these events talking about this stuff. And Gaiam was kind of clamping down on what they were doing. And it's like, wait a minute, this is stuff we developed. It's our material. Why would we not go out and talk about this, right?
Yeah.
And they got real like twitchy about it, and Gaiam got even more twitchy about it. And this is where you hear this argument from Jay Widener, where he's basically saying, well, we wanted them to do more show material, and we also wanted them to cut out certain types of material because they were very against certain subjects coming up on the show. And it created a non-moving forward path for all parties concerned.
For me, you can talk about whatever you want as long as it's not too inappropriate where, you know, if somebody younger sees this, what are they going to think about it? So it still has to be PG-13. That's the only thing I ask people on my channel, and just to be cordial and nice to each other. And, you know, we're here to have a chat. This is not a grilling session.
Right.
So I'm very much free flow and allowing you to tell your side of whatever you want to share with me. I want to see you as a human being, who you are. I do have a journalistic approach to it with specific questions that you know beforehand, because I did say to you what I was interested in chatting with you about specifically, because I did watch the Nevada conferences, and these are all the same topics I asked you about. because I watched that and that was interesting to me. Have you ever met Emery Smith in person?
I've only chatted with him via Facebook. I'm actually friends with him on Facebook, and we both were military service members. I've chatted with him numerous times about that. And, you know, I thanked him for his service. He thanked me for mine. We were talking about stuff. And that's about as far as it went, because when it came to like getting into like the SSP discussion stuff, he seemed to have like a hard barrier about, you know, whether or not he wanted to discuss that via messenger or not. And I understand his viewpoint. I get it. Because part of him making his income is doing that stuff. Sure. At the same time, you know, I was hoping that maybe he and I could at least discuss some of this stuff, and I could get at least confirmation from him about what I knew. And based on his own testimony on Gaiam, he confirmed a lot of what I already knew. So I thought that was very interesting when he was use certain terms and talk about certain things. I'm like, wow.
Honestly, I remote viewed him. I remote viewed Johnny Enoch, another person who's actually doing not too bad on Gaia. I sort of mentioned his name in some things, and Gaia took a huge interest in him, and he's doing well. I think if Gaia did roundtables and Gaia got more people on their show, like you, those people who could physically travel and pass whatever lie detector tests they want you to pass, just have more open discussions with Emery as the host, and have roundtables. They're so popular. So business-wise, that's good.
I think it would be interesting to get some of the folks who, in my opinion, have done exactly what people like Randy Kramer, you know, me, James Rink, all these folks that have been in these super soldier programs, get us on a panel or a round table and have us talk about, you know, well, what did you guys experience in this situation, right?
Yes.
And maybe you break it down to 10 episodes where you talk about certain very specific things that these individuals had to go through. For example, what people don't realize is in order to become a super soldier, you're traumatically tortured for long extended periods of time. And if you want to understand what that looks like, I recommend watching a show that was on A&E for a while called The Selection. It talks about what happens in SEER school, which I also went through in the military. And that particular show shows you the baseline of how they torture people. And that is exactly what they do in MK Ultra.
Do they electrocute people in their genitals? And I remember electrical prods in Nachtwaffen prison ships, barge ships.
Yep. The electrocution is commonly used.
Yep.
What we call the box is commonly used.
Light deprivation and sensory, like having you in the dark, the cold without clothes on. I remember genetic hybrids between dogs and wolves attacking naked people that were tied up, and they were being spiked. So spikes were driven into their back, and the dogs were attacking them from the front. And then somebody taking an electrical laser prod and like just electrocuting their genitals.
So again, in situations like this, we have to figure out what is a screen memory and what is an actual memory, right? People always ask me when I'm having this recall, how do I know that such and such was real, right? Usually for those of us that have had these memories, the ones that we know are real have all 5 senses included. Meaning you can smell the environment, you can hear the environment, you can almost taste the environment.
Yeah.
You definitely see the environment, and you definitely feel the environment with your skin.
I remember seeing the blood and the smell of blood, people swimming. There's like a whole tank filled with water and them swimming in their blood. Me seeing that outside the glass enclosure on the barge ship and smelling the blood. It's like a bloodbath. Remembering people's hands being cut off, electrocuted, then them thrown into the regen tank and then coming out fine, but keeping the traumatic memory of it. Like, I remember this is in my assassin altar, I guess, when I was an assassin for Nachtwaffen, bringing people in for misbehavior, whatever, the minor infraction, they were punished for it on these prison barge ships, them being tortured like I was just watching the torture. I wasn't dulling it out, but I was watching it with fascination. And that does, I mean, that does not make me a good person, but that's what I was doing in the SSP in Nachtwaffen.
Yep. And understand this too, right? So depending upon what you did in some programs, especially, for example, those of us that went through the Kruger Mercenary Corps group, a lot of us came out and went into other programs that we were used for what was called enforcer types. So you may have a mission. Let's say that your alter was on a mission.
Mm-hmm.
You get caught, or there's a chance that you could get caught. They may send a enforcer team in there, an HKT or an SKT in on top of where you are to remove that asset out of play and finish the mission.
Mm-hmm.
For example, let's say someone's in a prison, for example. Now, an example of where that did not happen is somebody, I think you've had him on your show, Tom Alvin, right?
No.
Well, Tom's talked about his stuff with James Rink and others. And one of his alters, my group actually rescued. That's how I knew that Tom was in, because when he started talking about this alter, I was like, I know exactly who that person is. I named them by name. I named what they did, all this stuff. But that's what we're talking about here is, like, in this case, they were caught by Draco. This alter was caught by the Draco, and they were tortured using the exact same methods that we were taught to do in MK Ultra. And it's follow-on programs.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the electrocution, the light sensory deprivation, and I had done a show about it, like my memories timeline describing this. And then I actually looked up electrocution and FBI, CIA, MK Ultra, and it all popped out in articles. Like, oh my God, that's confirmation. Like I've never even examined the electrocution memories because that's so gross and painful to look at people being tortured. But then when I did examine them, I didn't have any emotional attachment to it because I wasn't the one being tortured. I was just watching it being done when I dragged them in to these prison barge ships.
Right.
And I didn't get a good, all the SSP people in the SSP groups who were part of Nachtwaffen said they don't have those types of prison barge ships. Like, where are you getting this from? I'm like, well, it's part of my memory.
If I have vague recollections of those ships, and the reason why they're used is because you want to make sure that the Draco and other ET species can't come find them.
Yeah, and there's no evidence of these prisons on any planets. They don't have them on planets. They're all in cloaked, triangular, huge fleet ships. These prison barge ships that are cloaked, and they move them so you can't find them or trace them even. Because again, non-traceable, can't find it, can't prove it. It's part of Nachtwaffen. It's part of what they do.
Yep.
But everybody said, that's never happened to us. They don't have them. I'm like, yes, they do. So,
well, and again, this gets back to this whole idea of when you're trying to validate or create a veracity in someone's in their testimony, we have to look at, first off, consistency and truth with truth, right?
Yeah.
So when we're looking at facts, there are certain facts that either add up or don't, right? When you have, again, we're talking about this whole idea of having the super soldier panel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you have 8 to 10 people who are all talking about what they've been through, right? And all of a sudden they start having these overlapping memories that all have very similar overtones, very similar experiences. All of a sudden they're like, wait a minute, there's a much bigger picture going on here, and all these guys are saying this.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. I mean,
and I would even say, look at our testimonies online, right?
Yeah.
All the videos that I've done, all the videos that James has done, all the videos that these other folks have done, and see where the overlap is. If there's an overlap, then that tells you there's something going on.
Well, I mean, Tom was being tortured here on Earth with electrical pulses or charges, something. He was being tortured with it because he broke command orders or something in the SSP. He's like, I need this torture stopped. They're like sending these pulses or something. And I kind of looked at that and I'm like, yeah, they torture people. That's what they do. If even something they think is a wrong infraction and you didn't do anything too wrong, they'll torture you.
Yep.
With pulses, with electrocution, anything that's painful that gets you to learn a little lesson, not to misstep or stand out, just follow orders and command, they'll torture you with it. So you learn your lesson and get to keep the pain.
This is where the idea, by the way, when people talk about being a TI or a targeted individual, this is where that statement comes from, by the way. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, you keep all the pain. They don't remove that in the regen tank. They might remove the torture evidence, the physical evidence, but you get to keep the trauma pain for life, because that's a lesson you will never forget in Nachtwaffen. Yeah. Never. You get to keep your traumatic scars. Not the physical torture, but the trauma you get to keep. That's yours to own with you for the rest of your life.
Well, and think about this. This is exactly why when people talk about, well, why wouldn't Nachtwaffen talk when they're at these get-togethers, right, with the super board? Why wouldn't they talk about who they are, what they've done? Well, would you want to disclose this sort of behavior to 10 other programs, 9 other programs? They're all sitting there. Would you want to disclose this sort of behavior, that this is how we treat our people, this is what we have to do to keep them in line? Would you want that disclosed to the public? Well, hell no, you would not. So
yeah, people think I'm harmless, that I'm just a cute 5'5" blonde, but I'm very dangerous and I'm very a trained assassin. I may not look it. People don't believe me when I say that I'm a trained assassin, but I am. I mean, I am capable, if I'm triggered, I'm capable of doing many things that I would not be proud of, that I did in the SSP and could do again. If put to the test, I'm sure that training and programming would just surface and I'm capable of killing people. I honestly admit that. I wouldn't do it normally, but if under extreme circumstances, I'm sure I wouldn't ask too many questions and just do whatever I had. If I was, say, kidnapped by a rapist or a torturer, you know, what do you think I would do to get free?
Right.
I'd just whack him and go, escape. My first thought is, don't ask too many questions, just whack it. Kill him, whack him, and get out of there as quickly as you can.
Right.
That's the first thing that comes to mind in that scenario. Just get rid of them as fast as you can and escape before they have a chance to rape you or kill you.
Right.
Sodomize them first and get out. Like, what normal person has those thoughts?
Right.
Like, if I was in that, I hope I'm never attacked by anybody or abused, but if I was ever to be put in that situation, I would kill the person and leave, or just, you know, hurt them so much they'd be black and blue. That's my reaction in self-defense. That's what I would do. Yeah, I'm not kidding. That's what I would do.
I would have to say, based on what happened with me through SEER training, that I probably have a very high self-preservation instinct, and I would not want to be the person that's receiving into that, because you know, I had guys who were trained military professional soldiers who I was dealing with, and they were getting injured dealing with me. Yeah,
I mean, in high school, I've had guys drop me during dance class, and I didn't just ignore that. You know, homecoming dances and dances in general in PE, phys ed, we were taught line dancing. So one guy dropped me, and I got up. You know what I did? I put my hand in a fist and I punched him in the back. And he was yelling. And he's like, "You hit like a boy." I'm like, "Don't you ever forget that." You do this again to me, that's not the only thing I'll do to you.
Right.
So my reaction is very physical. It's not to just get up and walk away. No, you drop me, you put me in pain, I'll drop you and put you in pain. That's,
Right.
I mean, I've had huge fights with my dad, like raging, screaming. What do I do when the words don't work anymore? I punch him or I pinch him. Like, to get to the pain of me pinching him literally stops the rage. Like, what type of normal person would do that to somebody?
Right.
Like, my reaction is physically to cause pain, to stop rage. Is that a normal reaction in a person, do you think?
I don't think so. But the thing is, that's what you've learned to do.
Mm-hmm.
That's the mechanism that you've learned to work through. That's your pattern, right?
Mm-hmm. That's my Nachtwaffen pattern.
Right. So, and the thing is, these patterns do carry through into where we are right now.
Oh yeah, very much so.
You know, when you see people, especially, I've had people tell me that, like I had one individual email me and they're like, you know what? I knew I was aboard a ship that you were on because you were doing the morning announcements about what was happening on these shifts. And I remember your voice. Because it wasn't until I watched your video and I heard your voice, I almost like lost my shit. And it's like, well, but see, this is exactly what we're talking about, because it's the same. People get into a pattern of staccato, a rhythm, which is mental stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Psychology plays into that a lot. When you have people who are in their own psychology to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I know. I'm trying to work towards, if somebody engages with me in rage, to keep my hands to myself and not pinch them or punch them if I could help it, you know, to like, especially with my dad, because he's the one that does this to me. So I'm like, okay, well, keep your hands to yourself, Ileana. Don't go getting grabby there. Use your words, like, leave me alone. I'm not doing this with you. Stop. Don't yell at me. Use words. Don't punch or pinch.
Right.
But you push me way too far, you'll get pinched or you'll get slapped or punched. That's just gut training, gut reaction. How do you stop yourself from doing that? I'm trying my best to be aware of the programming and to not do that, but old habits die hard, you know?
I think for me, one thing I started doing is when I noticed a certain trigger would recurrently occur, right? I would actually try to stop the trigger before it actually occurred.
Yeah. Well, I live with the trigger.
And or desensitize the trigger to the point that's no longer a trigger.
Yeah.
So like certain things I'm going through right now that I'm dealing with where I'm currently living. There are certain triggers that have came up with certain people that are around me, and I'm looking at these triggers going, okay, well, obviously these triggers are not healthy.
No.
Why do I keep having these triggers recurrently show up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what happens is the minute you see the trigger show up, part of what we should be doing is debugging the trigger in the first place, saying, why did this get caused in the first place? And why did my brain say, for whatever reason, this behavior as the response to that trigger is somehow okay? And that's the hard part, is stopping yourself, like before the trigger actually fires off.
Yeah.
To know, where do you debug that at? Like, where do you stop yourself and go, wow, okay, what do I do with that? And a lot of people don't want to take the time to do that.
Well, I know where the trigger comes from. I live with my dad, who has moments of rage and aggression, and so do I. I just try not to trigger my dad. And if he is triggered, I try to use words and not pinch him or punch him. My mom just throws slippers at him, and I don't want to throw anything. I just have the desire to punch or pinch. It's like, I don't see it as sexual. Like, geese in self-defense will hiss and will bite or pinch you. I see myself as a goose. It's a goosey defense, because I don't know, it's not sexual yet it is very pleasurable to pinch somebody. So it's kind of like it's a program. So
Well,
it's like, okay, don't go, you wouldn't pinch somebody else in public. Don't pinch your dad when you're mad at him and
well,
he's in a rage.
so take that even a step further, right? So when we start looking at these processes that we learn either as children or in the programs, right?
Yeah.
What happens when they start manifesting, these triggers start manifesting in our current relationships?
Oh, yeah.
And that's where it gets really tough, because all of a sudden you're like, okay, this is not normal behavior. So why am I doing that?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, for example, what I see a lot of times when I've worked as a counselor, what I've seen is this idea of patterning or mirroring that happens, right? So what you'll typically see is you'll see, for example, a son will look at his dad and say, this is the way I should behave toward my significant other,
Mm-hmm.
because this is how my dad's acting toward his significant other.
Yeah.
And they look at their mother and say, well, this is how I expect my significant other to act toward me, because that's how she's acting toward my dad.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with young girls. They look at their mother and say, this is how I should expect my significant other to treat me. And this is how I should respond to that significant other, because how my mom's doing it to their significant other.
Mm-hmm.
Even though that behavior in many cases could be completely inappropriate and completely wrong, okay, let's be really blunt, it could be completely wrong, people continue manifesting that behavior over and over and over again.
Yeah.
This is why we hear this phrase about putting the fun in dysfunctional, right? Because people don't realize that they're in a dysfunctional relationship that's no longer healthy, and it's no longer working correctly for them.
Mm-hmm.
And when people come to people like you and I who are practitioners, one of the things that we have to do is evaluate whether or not that relationship, when they ask the question about it, is it really healthy or not? Is it energetic? Does it feel good or not? And what I typically do is I'll say, this is how I'm the impression I'm getting. This is what I'm sensing in the reading. This is what I'm hearing in the channeling.
Mm-hmm.
And you as the client can make a decision on whether you want to stay in that or not.
Yeah.
But this is what I'm getting.
Yeah.
And all I can do is arm them with what their, if I arm them with the information they need, they can make an intelligent decision instead of a repetitious decision.
Yeah. I mean, my parents never pinch each other. That I was never raised in that kind of behavior. This came up after my SSP memories started resurfacing, particularly the knock-off and watching others being tortured and pain. So I think it's a bad programming and a bad habit that I have, because my parents certainly don't do that, and my friends don't do that, and I was not raised to do that.
Right.
It's like almost like a pleasurable pain programming. I get pleasure out of pinching somebody when they're in a rage to stop them from raging. It's like a pleasure pain sensation. In a way, it's a technique to stop the other person. It's like throwing a cold bucket of water on them to just get them to like freeze. Instead, I don't throw cold water at people or a bucket of water. I'll just pinch them, and the pain disassociates them from the rage, and they wake up from the rage like, I can't believe I was behaving like that. So I think it's just like a coping mechanism. They're raging at me. I don't want to yell at them, so I just stand there quietly and I pinch them to make them stop.
Right.
So, but that's not good behavior either. I realize that's like inappropriate, but it's been fun. So admitting to it being wrong and not repeating the cycle and understanding why, for me, helps me to not engage in that behavior again. If
Right.
I can help myself, you know?
Yep.
So I know it's an SSP behavior. It's not that's how my parents raised me. And my parents certainly are dysfunctional in certain ways, but not in the pinching area. That's not from them.
Right. Right.
It's not from my grandparents. Like, nobody raised me to be like that. So it's my own stuff from my memory. And I didn't pinch anybody in the SSP. I just saw people tortured, but it's a pain mechanism. It's a response mechanism of pain and dealing with pain. So I get that. I get what I'm doing and why. And people think I'm making this up, but I'm not. This is what happens in my life. So I'm openly sharing this. So I guess we all deal with our programming and pain in certain ways.
Yep.
And it's realizing the patterns and behaviors and where they come from.
That's why I was an alcoholic. I mean, that's why I was coping with my PTSD that way.
Yeah. Well, I can't even touch alcohol. It makes me sick. Just physically makes me so ill. I've been haven't had a drink in 10 years, and I was never an alcoholic. It's just alcohol literally gives me a migraine and gives me numbness and paralysis. So I try not to touch food and drinks that'll make me sick. But I was enjoying the gluten. It's tasty. I know not to do it because I look like crap. But if it's pleasurable, then it's harder to stop an addiction because it feels good, but it's wrong. It makes you look like shit, act like shit, and feel like crap. Like, why would you put yourself through that? Because it's good. At the time, it feels so good and right. But then when you come out of that stupor, whatever that was, you're like, oh, what the effing? That was so painful. I don't want that again.
Right.
It's a trigger to make you stop another trigger, the pain sensation.
Right.
So, I mean, we could go on and on about that, but I think
we're getting on the 3-hour mark, right?
Yeah, I think we've discussed quite a lot of interesting topics. So I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yep. And I appreciate you letting me be on your channel. For those of you who are watching the video, thank you guys for watching us, and we hope to hear your feedback. And I hope you guys keep digging in and learning. So.
And is there a way that people can reach you for the counseling sessions that you do?
Well, I'm going to say if they want to forward stuff to that Johan Fritz SSP at protonmail.com, that would be an initial way to start that. I am very cautious about who I give my real stuff to, because what's happened with me in the past. I do readings and counseling sessions and other stuff for people as a job still. And I think for me, the big thing is I have to build up a certain level of trust with someone before I do that at this point. So.
And do you have a YouTube channel where people can watch your stuff?
Interestingly enough, when we were in Vegas, my YouTube channel got deleted by YouTube. James Rink, a third of his channel got deleted, his user base and some other stuff. And it looked like what they did is anybody who even whispered the idea of now my stuff was not copyrighted. I wasn't infringing on anyone's copyrights, but that was what was said, right? In James's case, he had some videos where they were talking about QAnon, which now that they're considered to be a domestic terrorist threat, all of a sudden they got thrown into that loop, right? And so no, I do not have a YouTube channel at this moment.
Yeah, I don't even discuss Q. That's not something it's like discussing religion and firearms. In politics, I don't discuss that, and I don't discuss Q. Call me old-fashioned, I just don't do certain things.
Yep, I'm the same boat.
I don't want to do that on my channel. It's like the 4 Qs that I will not engage in queuing. Just to make a joke out of that. But yeah, there's certain things that just don't engage in, because I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of things that just will get me into trouble. So I won't engage. If I like the SSP stuff, I like the healing stuff, I like psychology, arts, crystals, healing. Those are things anytime. Come on over, we'll chat.
All right. Well, thank you for having me on.
Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.